On Mother's Day, my millionaire son, Marcus, came to visit me in my modest Southside Chicago home. He sat on my faded floral sofa looking at his custom-tailored suit and asked Mom, "Are you happy with the $6,500 Clara sends you every month?" I froze with my teacup trembling against my saucer. I had not seen a single dime from them in 2 solid years. I hesitated looking at my son's expensive watch and replied softly, "Son, the church food pantry is keeping me alive these days." Right then, his elegant wife, Clara, walked into the room. The crystal champagne flute in her hand slipped shattering against my hardwood floor. "My name is Josephine Caldwell. I am 68 years old, and this is the story of how my own daughter-in-law tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward to steal a $50 million real estate legacy, and how my grandson and I set a trap that burned her house of cards to the ground. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth." The silence in my living room was deafening. Marcus stood up looking completely confused. "Mom, what do you mean the church food pantry is keeping you alive?" "Clara set up the automatic bank transfers 2 years ago when your pension ran out." Clara did not miss a single beat. She kicked the broken glass aside and her face shifted into a masterful mask of deep, agonizing pity. She rushed to Marcus and touched his arm with trembling fingers. "Marcus," she whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Dr. Evans warned us about this phase. The hallucinations, the memory lapses. She does not even remember the money." "What doctor?" I stood up, my knees popping slightly. "I have not seen a doctor in a year, and I certainly have not seen a penny of your money, Clara." But Marcus was already looking at me the way you look at a dying animal. "Mom, please." His voice broke. Clara showed me the bank statements. "You have been spending it. We did not want to upset you, but your mind is slipping." I realized in a cold, terrifying flash that Clara had not just stolen my monthly allowance. She had fabricated entire bank statements to convince my son I was losing my mind. She was building a paper trail to destroy me. Clara reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila folder. She handed it to Marcus with a tragic sniffle. "Show her, honey," she said. "Maybe seeing the proof will ground her in reality." Marcus opened the folder and laid 3 pages of bank statements on my coffee table. I looked down at the forged documents. They bore the official logo of my private bank. They had my legal name and my correct account number. But the transaction history was pure, absolute fiction. It showed thousands of dollars being withdrawn at riverboat casinos. It showed bizarre charges for high-end boutiques I had never set foot in. It showed massive wire transfers to offshore lottery websites. "Marcus, I do not gamble," I said, pointing a shaking finger at the fraudulent paper. "I have worn the same winter coat for 5 years. Do you honestly believe I am spending thousands at luxury boutiques downtown?" "Mom, people with severe dementia do things they cannot control," Marcus said, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "The doctor said you might develop compulsive behaviors and severe paranoia. We just want to keep you safe from yourself." My son was a brilliant technology developer, but he was utterly blind to the vicious snake he had married. Clara had preyed on his absolute deepest vulnerability, his terrible fear of losing me the exact same way he lost his father Calvin 10 years ago. Calvin and I spent 40 years buying and protecting commercial properties in Bronzeville. We fought against racist redlining. We fought off aggressive predatory developers. We built a massive portfolio of historic Black-owned business spaces. When Calvin suddenly passed away, he left the entire empire to me. Marcus never ever wanted the daily stress of the commercial real estate business. He just wanted to build innovative software programs. I fully supported him. I funded his very first startup company with my savings. When he became wealthy, he promised to take care of me so I could finally retire and truly enjoy my golden years. He trusted Clara to manage his extensive personal finances. He trusted her to send my allowance. He unwittingly handed her the master keys to my total livelihood. And now she was using those keys to lock me away in a cage. Clara carefully wiped a fake tear from her cheek. "We need to call the medical facility, Marcus. We cannot leave her here alone anymore. It is not safe at all. She might burn the house down or wander into busy traffic." "I am standing right here," I snapped, gripping the edge of the sofa to keep myself from crossing the room and slapping her face. "I built a real estate empire while you were still in grade school, Clara. Do not speak about me like I am a helpless infant." The righteous anger in my voice only completely cemented the misguided belief of Marcus that I was having a terrifying psychotic break. "Aggression is a symptom, Mom," he whispered, stepping backward away from me. "Please just calm down. We are going to get you the best professional help money can possibly buy." They turned around and walked out the front door. The heavy mahogany door clicked firmly shut, leaving me standing completely alone in the silent living room. I did not waste any time crying. Tears are a useless luxury you cannot afford when someone is actively digging your early grave. I walked straight over to the front window and quietly peeked through the closed blinds. Their shiny black SUV was slowly pulling away from the curb, but another strange car was parked across the street. A dark gray sedan with heavily tinted windows. It had been sitting there quietly since this early morning. The engine was currently running. Clara had not just come to drop off a fake Mother's Day gift. She had brought private security thugs to actively watch my house. I moved swiftly away from the window, keeping my back tightly against the wall. I needed to call my attorney immediately. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the landline phone from the wall mount. I pressed it to my ear. Nothing. No dial tone. Just dead, hollow silence. I quickly pulled my cell phone from my jacket pocket. The screen showed 0 signal bars. I checked my wireless internet router. The green connection lights were totally dark. They were aggressively jamming my signals. Clara was intentionally isolating the house so I could not reach out for any legal help. She wanted to make absolutely sure I could not call a real doctor to scientifically verify my sanity. She wanted to cut me off from the outside world entirely so that when they finally came to take me away, there would be absolutely no witnesses and no one to stop them. A cold, horrible chill washed over my skin. This was not a plan they were going to execute next week or next month. They were definitely moving tonight. Clara knew that if I had any time to deeply process what had just happened, I would find a way to securely access my accounts and publicly expose her forgery. She absolutely had to totally neutralize me immediately. I walked straight into my bedroom and threw open the closet. I reached past my winter coats and pressed my right hand against the back panel of the wall. Calvin was a brilliant old-school attorney who never fully trusted commercial banks or modern digital systems. Before he passed, he secretly remodeled this house himself. He personally built hidden compartments that no one else knew about, not even Marcus. I firmly pressed a specific knot in the wood paneling, and the board popped open. Inside the hidden space was a small, fireproof safe. I quickly spun the combination dial, inputting the exact date of our wedding. The heavy metal door clicked open. Inside the safe was everything I needed to securely survive. There was a thick stack of emergency cash totaling $10,000 in crisp $100 bills. There was a heavy set of master keys to every single commercial property we proudly owned in Bronzeville. And most importantly, there was Calvin's heavily encrypted external hard drive. The drive contained every original deed, every trust document, and every legal blueprint of our empire. I stuffed the cash and the hard drive into a small leather satchel. I clicked the heavy wood panel back into place, making sure it looked entirely undisturbed. My heart was beating with a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were completely, perfectly still. 40 years of sitting across negotiation tables from ruthless corporate sharks had taught me how to weaponize my own fear. You never let them see you sweat, and you never, ever let them trap you in a corner. I slung the leather satchel across my chest and walked silently back into the living room. I pulled a single high-backed armchair away from the wall and positioned it directly in the darkest shadow of the room. I sat down in the pitch-black silence. Through the narrow slit in the window blinds, I kept my eyes locked onto the gray sedan parked across the street. A faint orange glow flickered periodically from the driver's side window. The security guard was smoking a cigarette. He was comfortably waiting for the sun to rise, completely unaware that I was watching him right back. Sitting in that dark room, I had hours to think about what Clara was actually trying to steal. It was not just about my personal bank accounts or the house I lived in. Clara wanted the Bronzeville Heritage Block. Calvin and I had spent our entire adult lives acquiring those commercial buildings one by one. Back in the 80s, when the big banks refused to give fair loans to black business owners, Calvin used his brilliant legal mind to structure protective trusts while I negotiated the raw real estate deals. We created a safe haven for our community. We gave affordable leases to local grocers, independent bookstores, and family restaurants. We promised those families that their livelihoods would never be bulldozed for a soulless corporate high-rise. Clara did not care about our community. She grew up with generational wealth that insulated her from the struggles of everyday people. She only saw our historic properties as a massive payday. She saw dollar signs and prime real estate that could be sold to the highest bidder. And Marcus, my brilliant but incredibly naive son, had handed her the hammer to shatter my legacy. I felt a sharp, painful ache in my chest when I thought of Marcus. I was not an evil man, but his willful blindness made him incredibly dangerous. Clara had expertly weaponized his grief over losing Calvin. She convinced him that institutionalizing me was an act of profound love. She probably practiced her fake tears in the mirror until they looked flawless. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed softly, marking 2:00 in the morning. I did not move a single muscle. If I fell asleep, I knew I would wake up strapped to a medical bed, heavily sedated and stripped of my basic human rights. I focused entirely on my breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. I needed my mind to be sharper than it had ever been. At 4:00, the gray sedan turned its headlights off. The sky outside began to shift from pitch black to a deep, bruised purple. The streetlights flickered and died. The neighborhood was completely silent, except for the distant rumble of the early morning transit trains. I stood up from the armchair. My joints ached from sitting still for so long, but adrenaline instantly pushed the pain away. I walked into the kitchen and put on a heavy, nondescript trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat. I laced up a pair of sturdy walking shoes. I was not planning to go quietly. At exactly 6:30 in the morning, a large white van pulled onto my street. It did not have any medical logos or hospital insignias on the side. It was completely blank. The van parked directly behind the gray sedan. My pulse hammered in my ears. This was the moment. The heavy side door of the van slid open, and 2 massive men stepped out onto the pavement. They were wearing dark blue scrubs, but they looked absolutely nothing like nurses. They looked like professional bouncers, hired to handle violent resistance. Then a sleek silver Mercedes glided around the corner and parked right behind the van. Clara stepped out into the crisp morning air. She was wearing a tailored designer pantsuit, holding a silver thermos of coffee and a thick clipboard. She looked like she was arriving to manage a routine corporate demolition. I watched her hand a piece of paper to the men in scrubs. It was the forged court order for a 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold. I stepped away from the window and moved rapidly toward the back of the house. I heard the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into my front door lock. Clara had stolen my spare key from Marcus. She was not even going to bother knocking. I did not run out the back door. That would be completely foolish. Clara had undoubtedly positioned the guard from the gray sedan in the back alley to cut off my only obvious escape route. Instead, I opened the door to the basement and rushed down the wooden stairs. The basement was dark and smelled faintly of damp earth and old storage boxes. I moved directly toward the old laundry chute built into the far corner of the foundation. Calvin had modified this house decades ago, during an era when we needed to secure our valuables from aggressive local gangs. He converted the old coal cellar into a reinforced exit that connected directly to the adjacent property. I pulled the false wall panel aside and squeezed myself into the narrow concrete tunnel. It was cramped and completely covered in thick, decades-old dust. I crawled forward on my hands and knees, ignoring the sharp scrape of the concrete against my palms. Above my head, I heard the heavy thud of boots walking across my living room floor. The men were inside. "Check the bedroom!" Clara shouted, her voice echoing down through the floorboards. "The court order is fully signed. Do whatever you have to do to restrain her, but do not bruise her face. I need her looking presentable for the facility intake photo." A cold wave of absolute disgust washed over me. I kept crawling forward until I reached the heavy iron grate that opened into Mrs. Henderson's overgrown backyard. Mrs. Henderson had passed away 2 years ago, and her property had been vacant ever since. I pushed the grate open and climbed out into the cool morning air. I quickly brushed the heavy dust from my trench coat and adjusted my hat, pulling the brim down low over my face. From my hidden vantage point behind a large oak tree, I could clearly see the back of my house. The security guard was indeed standing right by my back gate holding a 2-way radio. He was scanning the alley looking for any sign of movement. I stayed completely out of his line of sight, crouching low behind the overgrown bushes. I moved silently from yard to yard, navigating the property lines I had known intimately for 40 years. I knew exactly which fence gates squeaked and which pathways were safely hidden from the street. I heard a sudden loud crash coming from my bedroom window. The men had realized I was not in the bed. "She is not here!" one of the men yelled, his voice carrying clearly through the crisp air. "The bed is totally cold. She has been gone for hours." I heard Clara scream in absolute fury, a high-pitched sound of pure, unfiltered panic. "What do you mean she is not here? Find her right now. If she gets to a real bank or a real lawyer, I am completely ruined. Tear the house apart." I did not wait to hear another word. I slipped through the final gate and stepped out onto the bustling sidewalk of a busy commercial street 2 blocks away from my home. The morning commuters were already filling the pavement, hurrying to get to their offices. I blended instantly into the crowd, just another elderly woman in a trench coat, going about her morning business. I walked rapidly toward the transit station. My lungs burned with the effort, but I forced myself to maintain a steady, normal pace. If I ran, I would draw unwanted attention. If I panicked, I would give myself away. I reached the bus stop just as the heavy doors of the city bus swung open with a loud pneumatic hiss. I climbed the steps and dropped my cash fare into the machine. I walked straight to the back of the bus and took a seat in the corner. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window and saw Clara's white van speeding down the opposite side of the street. The men in scrubs were frantically scanning the sidewalks looking for an old woman who was supposedly confused and wandering. They drove right past my bus, completely ignoring the calm, collected woman sitting in the back row. I let out a long, slow breath. I had successfully escaped the immediate physical trap, but the war was only just beginning. Clara had forged a legal conservatorship. That meant she had the full backing of a corrupt legal system. I was officially a fugitive from my own family, and I had absolutely zero access to my regular financial resources. I pulled the small leather satchel tighter against my chest, feeling the hard, rectangular shape of Calvin's encrypted drive. Clara thought she had brilliantly outsmarted a tired old woman. She genuinely believed her forged documents and her expensive thugs would be enough to erase me from existence. But she had made the most monumental mistake of her life. She had given me the supreme advantage of total surprise. I knew exactly what she was trying to do, and she had absolutely no idea that I possessed the master keys to destroy her. I needed to get to a secure location, and I needed serious technological firepower to crack Clara's digital facade. There was only one person in the entire city of Chicago I could trust right now. Someone who hated Clara just as much as I did. Someone who possessed the brilliant skills to dismantle her web of lies. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my emergency burner phone, a cheap plastic device Calvin had insisted I keep hidden for worst-case scenarios. I turned it on and dialed a number from memory. The line rang 3 times before a groggy young voice answered. "Hello," the voice mumbled. "Jamal, it is your grandmother," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I need your help immediately. Do not ask any questions. Just lock your dorm room door and boot up your primary computer. I am on my way." Nana Jamal said, his voice instantly losing all traces of sleep. "Are you okay? You sound like you are running." "I am not running, Jamal," I replied, a cold smile forming on my face. "I am simply repositioning. Your stepmother just declared war on this family, and she is about to find out exactly why they call me the architect of Bronzeville. I will be there in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone and looked out at the Chicago skyline rising beautifully in the distance. The battle lines were officially drawn. The transit train rattled and swayed along the elevated tracks, carrying me straight into the beating heart of downtown Chicago. I sat perfectly still near the rear doors, keeping my wide-brimmed hat pulled low over my face and my heavy trench coat wrapped tightly around my body. My leather satchel containing Calvin's encrypted hard drive and my emergency cash was pressed firmly against my ribs. Looking out the scratched window at the towering steel and glass skyscrapers, I felt a bizarre sense of detachment. Just 24 hours ago, I was a highly respected commercial real estate pioneer. Now I was actively hiding from my own family, moving through the city like a wanted criminal. I stepped off the train and merged seamlessly into the dense crowds of morning commuters. The financial district was completely alive with people rushing to their offices holding briefcases and expensive coffees. I walked with deliberate purpose toward the imposing marble facade of my private bank. This was an institution where I had conducted high-level corporate business for over 30 years. The heavy brass doors gleamed in the morning sunlight. For a brief, fleeting moment as my hand grasped the cold metal handle, I felt a sudden rush of comforting familiarity. This was my absolute territory. I knew the managers. I knew the corporate protocols. I firmly believed that once I reached the safety of my private accounts and contacted my formidable legal team, Clara, and her forged documents would be swiftly obliterated. I walked across the polished marble floor of the main lobby, ignoring the plush waiting area and moving directly toward the priority service desk. I specifically sought out a woman named Maria. I had known Maria for 15 years. I had watched her get promoted from a junior clerk to a senior account manager. I had even sent a generous floral arrangement to the hospital when her first daughter was born. She was a fiercely loyal and highly competent professional. Maria was typing rapidly on her keyboard when I approached her station. "Good morning, Maria," I said, keeping my voice low and completely steady. "I need to immediately access my primary business accounts, and I need to use a secure private office to contact my lead attorney right away." Maria looked up with a warm, professional smile that instantly froze and shattered the second she recognized my face beneath the heavy hat. "Mrs. Caldwell," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the bank lobby. "What are you doing here?" Her terrified reaction sent a sharp, cold spike of adrenaline directly into my veins. "I am here to conduct my standard business, Maria," I replied, projecting absolute authority. "Please pull up my primary portfolio. There has been a severe security breach involving my daughter-in-law, and I need to lock down all external transfers immediately." Maria swallowed hard, her hands visibly trembling as they hovered over her computer keyboard. "Mrs. Caldwell," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the bank lobby. "I cannot do that. I cannot access your portfolio." "What do you mean you cannot access my portfolio?" I demanded, leaning closer to the counter. "I am the sole owner and primary signatory of those accounts." Maria looked at her computer monitor, and her face turned the color of dry ash. She slowly turned the flat screen slightly so I could see the glaring red alerts flashing across my financial dashboard. "Mrs. Caldwell, a legal permanent conservatorship was fully executed and aggressively processed through our corporate legal department at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. Your daughter-in-law, Clara, is now officially listed as your permanent medical and financial guardian." I stared at the glowing red letters on the screen, completely unable to process the absolute magnitude of what she was saying. Clara had not just secured a temporary psychiatric hold. She had somehow completely bypassed the standard legal waiting periods and bribed a corrupt judge to sign a permanent conservatorship order in the middle of the night. "Every single personal and business account is totally frozen," Maria whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "You are officially flagged as a legally incapacitated adult. The system has completely locked you out. Your authorized balance is showing as zero. I cannot hand you a single dollar without explicit written permission from Clara." The sheer suffocating weight of Clara's betrayal threatened to crush the breath right out of my lungs. She had thoroughly stripped me of my fundamental human rights. On paper, I was entirely erased. I no longer possessed a legal voice. I could not hire an attorney. I could not sign a basic contract. I could not even legally buy a cup of coffee using my own debit card. But as the initial shock rapidly faded, it was instantly replaced by a brilliant, blinding rage. Clara was a greedy, desperate woman, drowning in massive, undisclosed debt. She did not orchestrate this complex, terrifying legal maneuver just to steal my modest monthly allowance or take my residential house. She was actively hunting for a much bigger prize. "Check the commercial deeds," I demanded, slamming my hands down onto the marble counter. "Do not look at the liquid cash, Maria. Check the corporate real estate registry right now. Pull up the current status for the Bronzeville Heritage Block." Maria frantically typed the specific property codes into her restricted database. As the detailed registry loaded onto her screen, I watched her eyes widen in absolute, unadulterated horror. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. "What is it?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "Read it to me right now." "The deeds were officially transferred this morning, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice breaking with raw emotion. "Clara signed a preliminary binding sale agreement at 8:30. She is aggressively selling the entire Bronzeville commercial block. She is selling it to Vanguard Developments for exactly $50 million. The world around me seemed to completely stop spinning. The ambient noise of the bank lobby simply faded away into a dull, distant hum. Vanguard Developments was a ruthless, predatory corporate syndicate that Calvin and I had successfully fought off for over a decade. They were notorious for aggressively purchasing historic Black-owned neighborhoods, systematically evicting all the local businesses, and bulldozing the entire area to build soulless luxury high-rises for the ultra-wealthy. Clara was not just stealing my money. She was actively, deliberately destroying 40 years of my life's work. She was going to happily, forcefully evict the family grocers, the independent bookstores, and the neighborhood restaurants that relied on our protective leases. She was going to completely decimate the thriving community Calvin and I had sworn to fiercely protect, all for a massive $50 million payout to save her own miserable life. "Mrs. Caldwell," Maria whispered urgently, glancing toward the bank security guard stationed near the front doors. A system-wide alert was automatically triggered the exact second I pulled up your name. "The corporate fraud department knows you are standing in this building right now. They are legally required to contact the local authorities and notify your registered guardian. You have to leave this building immediately before they lock the front doors." I looked at Maria, seeing the genuine fear and profound sorrow in her eyes. "Thank you, Maria," I said, my voice completely devoid of any panic. "I will never forget that you tried to warn me." I turned away from the counter and walked across the polished marble floor, keeping my posture incredibly rigid and my head held high. I did not run. Running implies guilt. Running implies fear. I walked out through the heavy brass doors and stepped back into the freezing cold morning air of downtown Chicago. I stood on the bustling sidewalk, completely surrounded by thousands of busy people, feeling profoundly isolated. I pulled my coat tighter against the biting wind. I had exactly $42 of miscellaneous loose cash in my coat pocket. The $10,000 securely hidden in my leather satchel was completely useless for retaining a high-powered corporate attorney, because any legitimate law firm would demand a legally verifiable retainer fee. On paper, my official bank balance was absolutely zero. I had absolutely no home to safely return to and no legally recognized identity. I was an officially designated fugitive, an escaped psychiatric patient with an active medical warrant out for my immediate capture. Clara had masterfully cornered me. She assumed I would completely break down and surrender to the terrifying reality of my erased existence. But Clara had made a fatal, catastrophic error. She failed to understand that the Bronzeville Heritage Block was shielded by layers of defensive trusts. There was only one person in this city who possessed the technological brilliance required to help me. I needed my grandson, Jamal. I turned my back on the bank and walked toward the station. The bitter wind whipped off Lake Michigan as I marched toward the transit station. I clutched the heavy leather satchel against my chest, feeling the hard edge of Calvin's encrypted drive. I had exactly $42 in my pocket. It was barely enough to buy a hot meal, let alone retain a corporate litigation firm. Clara thought she had stripped me of all my power by freezing my bank accounts. She genuinely believed that wealth was the only real weapon I possessed. But she had severely underestimated the actual foundation of my empire. My greatest asset was not sitting in a bank vault. My greatest asset was currently sitting in a dormitory room at Northwestern University. My grandson Jamal was the only child from my son Marcus' first marriage to Sarah. Marcus' first wife was a brilliant, beautiful black woman named Sarah, who passed away from breast cancer when Jamal was only 7 years old. When Marcus married Clara a few years later, Clara immediately went to work erasing Sarah's memory from the household. She pushed Jamal aside, treating him like an unwanted nuisance rather than a grieving child. Marcus was too completely absorbed in building his tech company to notice how deeply his new wife marginalized his own son, but I noticed. I stepped in and made sure Jamal always knew he was deeply loved and fiercely protected. I paid his college tuition in cash every single semester to ensure Clara could never use money to control his future. Jamal had inherited his grandfather's quiet, relentless focus and his mother's staggering intellect. He was a 21-year-old cybersecurity major who spent his free time exposing corrupt corporate networks and building custom computer rigs. If anyone could tear down the digital walls Clara had erected around my life, it was him. I finally arrived at the sprawling university campus. I blended into the bustling crowd, keeping my pace steady and purposeful. I navigated the familiar pathways toward Jamal's residential hall. I hurried down the long fluorescent-lit hallway on the 3rd floor. I reached room 312 and knocked 3 times. 10 seconds later, the heavy wooden door swung open. Jamal stood there wearing a faded gray sweatshirt and holding a half-empty mug of coffee. His eyes widened in absolute shock when he saw my heavy trench coat and the fierce, desperate look on my face. "Nana," he said, stepping aside immediately to pull me into the room. "What are you doing here? Why do you look like you are hiding from the police?" "I am hiding from the police, Jamal," I said, stepping inside as he quickly locked the heavy deadbolt behind me. "And I need your help right now." Jamal did not ask any useless questions. He did not waste time telling me to calm down or offering me a glass of water. He took one look at my face and instantly shifted into complete tactical mode. He pulled out a chair for me and sat down in front of a massive desk covered in 3 large glowing computer monitors. "Tell me exactly what is happening," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "Your stepmother has declared war on this family," I said, sitting down heavily. "She forged a medical diagnosis claiming I have severe late-stage dementia. She bribed a judge to secure a permanent legal conservatorship early this morning. She has completely frozen every single one of my personal and business bank accounts. She hired private mercenaries to forcibly drag me to a locked psychiatric ward." Jamal's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his cheeks twitched. That vicious, greedy woman, he whispered, his fingers hovering over his mechanical keyboard. "I always knew she was absolutely toxic, but I never thought she would try something this monstrous. I will completely wipe her digital life off the map, Nana." "That is not all," I said, leaning forward. "She is not just trying to steal my liquid cash. I went to the bank this morning before they could lock me out. She signed a preliminary commercial sale agreement. She is attempting to sell the entire Bronzeville Heritage Block to Vanguard Developments for $50 million. Jamal froze. He knew exactly what the Bronzeville Block meant to our family and to our community. He knew about the decades of blood, sweat, and tears Calvin and I had poured into protecting those historic Black-owned businesses. "Vanguard Developments will bulldoze the entire neighborhood," he said, his voice shaking with pure, unadulterated anger. "We cannot let that happen. We are not going to let that happen," I said, pulling the encrypted hard drive from my leather satchel and placing it firmly on his desk. "But I cannot stop her without cash or a legal identity. I need you to break through her digital fortress. I need to know exactly why she is risking massive federal prison time to execute a $50 million corporate theft in broad daylight." Jamal grabbed a specialized connecting cable and plugged my hard drive into his secure network hub. "Give me exactly 10 minutes, Nana. I am going to build a custom phishing backdoor to bypass her personal firewall. I will spoof an emergency bank notification to her cell phone. The absolute second she clicks the link to verify the fake transaction, I will have total unrestricted access to her entire private email server." I watched in quiet awe as his hands flew across the keyboard. Lines of complex green code cascaded down the black screens. He was operating with a ruthless, brilliant efficiency. This was the exact same fierce determination Calvin used to display when dismantling a corrupt corporate contract. Just as Jamal executed the final command sequence, a heavy, aggressive pounding echoed violently against the wooden door of the dorm room. We both froze. The pounding came again, louder and far more demanding. "Campus security," a deep, gruff voice shouted through the thick wood. "Open the door right now." Jamal quickly checked the live feed from the tiny security camera he had secretly installed in the hallway ceiling. He switched the feed to his left monitor. Standing outside the door were 2 massive men wearing dark, tailored suits. They were absolutely not campus security guards. They had the distinct, rigid posture of highly trained private investigators. Clara had somehow tracked my movements. She probably traced the transit card I had foolishly used to board the morning train. "Nana," Jamal whispered, pointing toward a small wooden door near his bed. "Get into the maintenance closet right now. Do not make a single sound." I grabbed my heavy trench coat and my leather satchel and squeezed myself into the tiny, cramped utility closet. It smelled strongly of cleaning supplies and old damp mops. I pulled the louvered door shut, leaving only a microscopic crack so I could see into the room. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. If these men found me, they would forcefully drag me out of the building and inject me with heavy sedatives before I could even scream for help. I watched through the narrow wooden slats as Jamal casually messed up his hair and grabbed a textbook. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just a few inches, keeping the heavy chain engaged. "Can I help you?" he asked, pitching his voice to sound perfectly annoyed and half asleep. "I am trying to study for a massive midterm exam here." The taller of the 2 men pushed his heavy hand firmly against the door, trying to force it open. "We are looking for an elderly woman, Josephine Caldwell. We have credible reports that she entered this building 10 minutes ago. She is suffering from a severe psychological breakdown, and she represents a massive danger to herself. You want to search my room without a warrant?" Jamal snapped, his voice rising in perfect righteous indignation. "Are you actual police officers?" Show me your official police badges right now, or I am calling the Chicago Police Department and reporting 2 strange armed men harassing a black college student in his private dormitory. The threat worked flawlessly. The 2 private investigators exchanged a tense, nervous glance. They knew Clara was operating entirely outside the boundaries of normal legal protocols. They were being paid a premium to quietly capture an old woman, not to cause a massive, highly publicized racial profiling incident on a prominent university campus. If she contacts you, you need to call your father immediately. The tall man growled, backing away from the door. She requires urgent medical restraint. Jamal slammed the door completely shut and locked the heavy deadbolt. I pushed the louvered door open and stepped back out into the room. My knees were slightly trembling. "You are a brilliant liar, Jamal. I learned from the absolute best, Nana," he smiled. "Let us find out exactly why she needs $50 million tonight. We are in." Jamal turned his attention back to the glowing computer monitors. His fingers moved across the mechanical keyboard with fierce intensity. The massive screens filled with rapidly scrolling lines of data. His custom phishing program successfully bypassed the private firewall Clara had installed. He had tricked her into clicking a fake security alert. This gave him complete, unrestricted access to her personal server. I stood closely behind his chair, watching her digital walls fall. We were looking directly into the hidden life of my ruthless daughter-in-law. The sheer volume of encrypted secret files was absolutely staggering to witness completely. Jamal opened a folder labeled with a complex numerical code. He quickly ran a decryption algorithm to reveal the contents. The screen suddenly flooded with highly confidential bank statements and urgent legal notices. "Look at this, Nana," he whispered, pointing at the top document. "This is a bankruptcy filing from over a year ago. It belongs to her father's elite private wealth management firm." Clara always bragged about her massive generational wealth and high society status, but her family lost absolutely everything in a catastrophic market crash last spring. She has been completely broke for over 12 long months. I stared at the glowing screen, trying to process this. Clara had maintained her flawless, expensive facade without missing a single step. She continued buying designer clothes, driving luxury vehicles, and hosting lavish dinner parties. How was she funding this lavish lifestyle? I asked, my voice barely a quiet whisper in the silent dorm room. Jamal opened another encrypted document, his eyes scanning the dense financial jargon. He clicked through a series of offshore banking records. She did not reduce her spending at all, Nana. Instead, she took out a massive secret cash loan to cover her dark tracks perfectly. Jamal highlighted a specific transaction record hidden deep in the files. She borrowed $30 million from a mysterious offshore private equity group. I read the name of the holding company out loud: Apex Global Capital. Jamal shook his head, his face turning pale in the monitor light. "That is a known shell corporation, Nana. They are directly tied to a highly ruthless international crime syndicate. They launder illicit money through high-risk corporate loans. Clara borrowed $30 million from a violently dangerous cartel, and the compounding interest rate on this secret illegal loan is absolutely astronomical every day." A cold, heavy knot formed tightly in my lower stomach. Clara was not just a greedy woman looking to steal my comfortable retirement savings. She was swimming in incredibly deep, dangerous waters. "She owes them $30 million, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How has she been paying the massive monthly interest to keep them away?" Jamal pulled up a different set of ledgers. These bore the familiar corporate logo of Marcus Tech Company. My brilliant, successful son had trusted Clara to manage his entire financial portfolio. He had foolishly given her absolute, total, unrestricted daily access. "She has been systematically embezzling money directly from my father's corporate accounts," Jamal said, his voice thick with profound anger. "Look at these wire transfers. She created fake vendor invoices to funnel millions of dollars out of his company. She has been bleeding his tech startup completely dry just to pay the monthly interest on her illegal cartel loan. Dad has absolutely no idea that his company is practically insolvent right now. Clara has been showing him fabricated financial reports to keep him happy and blind. She actively betrayed her own husband to save her own miserable, selfish, pathetic life." The sheer scale of her deception was genuinely difficult to comprehend. She had manipulated my son, stolen from his company, and put our entire family in extreme physical danger. But the stolen corporate funds were clearly not enough to solve her ultimate problem. Jamal opened an urgent, highly threatening email sent to Clara's private address just 2 days ago. The sender intentionally used a highly encrypted anonymous proxy digital server. The message was incredibly brief and absolutely terrifying. The final principal payment is due in full tonight. If the funds do not clear, your life is completely permanently forfeit immediately. I read the terrifying words on the screen 3 times. The principal is due tonight, I repeated out loud. The pieces of her monstrous puzzle finally snapped perfectly into place. This was exactly why she desperately needed to sell the Bronzeville Heritage Block today. The historic commercial properties Calvin and I spent 40 years acquiring were valued at exactly $50 million. Clara had arranged the rapid preliminary sale to Vanguard Developments because she desperately needed a massive, instantaneous cash infusion to pay off her violent cartel creditors. She was quite literally fighting desperately for her own physical daily survival. "She is a dead woman walking," Jamal whispered, staring at the threatening email. "If that $50 million real estate transaction does not officially close tonight, those cartel enforcers will absolutely kill her without a second thought. She is not just trying to get rich, Nana. She is completely, literally trying to buy her own life back." This sudden, profound realization drastically changed the entire landscape of our urgent situation. Clara was operating under the extreme, terrifying pressure of a ticking clock. A desperate, cornered animal will fiercely attack anything that stands in its way to survive the dark night. "That explains why she moved so aggressively to institutionalize me this morning," I said, leaning back in my wooden chair. She needed absolute, unquestionable legal authority to sell the Bronzeville properties today. The commercial buyers at Vanguard Developments would never transfer $50 million without a legally ironclad signature. By forcing me into a locked psychiatric ward and securing a permanent medical conservatorship, Clara instantly became the sole legal signatory for my entire real estate portfolio. She totally removed me from the corporate board entirely. I was the only physical obstacle standing between her and the massive life-saving payout. "She planned this with absolute ruthless precision," Jamal said, his fingers clenching into tight, angry fists. "She used my father's grief and fear against him to get you declared incompetent. Then she hired private mercenaries to make you disappear into a heavily medicated fog. If you had fallen asleep in your living room last night, you would be locked in a padded cell right now, and Clara would be happily signing away our entire family legacy to save her own skin. We absolutely cannot ever let her destroy everything you and Grandpa built for our entire resilient, beautiful community here." I looked at my brave, intelligent grandson and felt a powerful surge of deep maternal pride. "We are not just going to stop her, Jamal. We are going to publicly dismantle her entire fraudulent existence. We are going to expose her monstrous lies to my son, to Vanguard Developments, and to the entire city of Chicago. But we need to know exactly when and where the final sale is taking place. Clara is running out of time. She needs that cartel debt cleared before midnight. Find the final closing documents, Jamal. Please tell me where the meeting is right now." Jamal eagerly returned to his keyboard, rapidly searching through Clara's scheduled calendar events and flagged priority emails. She has been frantically coordinating with the senior executive team at Vanguard Developments all morning. He opened a highly confidential digital itinerary marked with urgent red flags. "The final closing is not happening in a boring corporate boardroom, Nana. Vanguard Developments is hosting their massive annual charity gala tonight. They invited all the major political figures and wealthy socialites in the city. Clara and Dad are prominently listed as the primary guests of honor for this extremely lavish, exclusive high society gala event. They are turning the sale of our historic Black-owned neighborhood into a massive public relations spectacle," I said, my blood boiling with righteous fury. "Vanguard wants to publicly announce their new $50 million tech campus project tonight." Jamal nodded silently, pointing at a specific line on the glowing digital schedule. "Clara and Dad are scheduled to officially sign the final property transfer deeds live on the main ballroom stage. They have a massive ceremonial signing planned for exactly 9 o'clock tonight. The local media will absolutely be there to photograph the entire transaction for the morning business papers." I checked the gold watch securely fastened around my left wrist. It was currently 5 o'clock in the evening. We had exactly 4 hours to prevent a $50 million corporate theft and save my entire life legacy. Clara thought she had brilliantly outsmarted an old, defenseless woman. She thought she could completely erase my identity, steal my commercial empire, and use my hard-earned wealth to pay off a violent criminal syndicate. She vastly underestimated the fierce, unyielding power of a cornered matriarch. It was finally time to show my daughter-in-law what true, absolute power looked like. Jamal turned his attention back to the glowing monitors, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. He knew discovering the massive cartel debt was only the first piece of the terrifying puzzle. We needed to know exactly how and when Clara planned to execute the sale of the Bronzeville properties. He launched a specialized tracking program to aggressively scan her highly encrypted digital calendar, looking for specific geographic locations tied to Vanguard developments today. The search algorithm sorted through fake appointments and decoy meetings Clara set up. Finally, the center screen flashed bright green. Jamal expertly isolated a secure digital itinerary that Clara had received from the Vanguard corporate legal team just 2 hours ago. He bypassed the final security prompt and opened the document. Nana, Jamal said, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, urgent whisper. The final closing for the $50 million sale is not happening in a corporate boardroom. It is not happening behind closed doors at a private bank either. Where is she doing it? I asked, moving closer to the heavy wooden desk to read the glowing text directly over his shoulders. Vanguard Developments is hosting their massive annual High Society Charity Gala tonight, Jamal explained, carefully tracing a line of text with his finger. They rented out the grand ballroom at the historic Drake Hotel downtown. It is going to be packed with the wealthiest politicians, ruthless real estate developers, and prominent socialites in Chicago. Clara and Dad are prominently listed on the official program as primary guests of honor. I stared at the bright computer screen, feeling a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over my entire body. Clara was not just trying to steal my life legacy in secret. She was actively turning the destruction of a historic Black-owned neighborhood into a glamorous public relations spectacle. She deeply wanted the wealthy elite of Chicago to loudly applaud her, while she violently bulldozed the livelihoods of dozens of hardworking families. "Look at this specific timeline," Jamal said, pointing to a highlighted yellow section at the bottom of the long digital itinerary. "They have a massive ceremonial signing scheduled for exactly 9 o'clock tonight. Vanguard invited multiple local media outlets and prominent business reporters to photograph the entire transaction. Clara is planning to sign the final property transfer deeds live on the main ballroom stage. She desperately wants the local news cameras to capture the exact moment so no one can ever question the legal validity of the sale later. She needs the public spectacle to legitimize her forged conservatorship." I said, the final pieces of her malicious trap making perfect sense. If she signs those official papers in front of the local media and all those powerful billionaires, no local judge will ever dare to question the massive transaction. The offshore cartel will immediately get their $30 million, and Clara will instantly walk away totally, completely clean. I quickly glanced down at the vintage gold watch securely fastened around my left wrist. It was exactly 5 o'clock in the early evening. We had precisely 4 short hours until Clara proudly walked onto that brightly lit stage to permanently erase 40 years of my relentless hard work and dedication. 4 hours to entirely stop a deeply desperate woman who was actively fighting to save her own miserable life from a ruthless international crime syndicate. "We have to call the federal authorities right now," Jamal said, reaching quickly for his cell phone on the desk. "We can rapidly send them the undeniable proof of the cartel debt and the forged medical records. They can violently raid the Drake Hotel and arrest her before she ever picks up a silver pen tonight." I reached out and placed my hand firmly over his phone, pushing it gently back down onto the desk surface. "No, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and incredibly calm. "Calling the authorities right now is incredibly dangerous and highly unpredictable. Clara currently holds a legally binding permanent conservatorship order signed by a corrupt state judge. If we simply call the police, she will effortlessly play the sympathetic role of the terrified innocent victim. She will loudly show them the forged medical documents, claiming I am suffering from severe paranoid dementia. The police will immediately aggressively arrest me and drag me straight to the locked psychiatric facility before they ever bother to investigate her hidden offshore bank accounts." Jamal looked at me with wide, terrified brown eyes. "Then how do we successfully stop the sale, Nana? We cannot just sit here and quietly let her hand over the precious Bronzeville properties to Vanguard Developments tonight while doing absolutely nothing." Stopping the sale tonight is simply not enough. I explained my mind, working with a sharp, ruthless clarity I had proudly honed over decades of intense corporate warfare. If we only disrupt the fancy charity gala, Clara will still legally possess the powerful conservatorship over my life. She will just easily find another greedy corporate buyer tomorrow or the following day. We need to publicly, conclusively, absolutely destroy her entire legal foundation right in front of the very powerful people she is desperately trying to impress. We need to permanently, thoroughly strip her of her stolen power so she can never ever attempt this monstrous betrayal again. But how do we effectively do that without getting you arrested and heavily medicated? Jamal asked nervously, running his hands through his dark hair as he tried to process my terrifying plan. By clearly proving that the specific LLC she ruthlessly stole is completely entirely worthless, I said, a fierce, determined smile slowly forming on my face. When your grandfather Calvin and I first bought the Bronzeville block, we set up a management company called Washington Real Estate LLC. That is the exact company Clara stole this morning with her fake documents. But Calvin was a brilliant, cautious tax attorney. 20 years ago, he secretly moved the actual physical land into an irrevocable federal historic landmark trust forever. Jamal's eyes lit up with sudden, brilliant understanding. So Clara does not actually physically own the land. She only owns the management company paperwork. She is attempting to sell $50 million of protected federal property she has absolutely zero legal right to touch today or any other day going forward. Exactly, I said, feeling a massive surge of righteous energy firmly swelling in my chest. But I absolutely need the original certified trust documents to definitively prove it to the Vanguard CEO tonight. Without the physical original paperwork, it is just the fragile word of an old woman against a powerful, ironclad corporate contract drafted by billionaire lawyers. "Where are the original trust documents?" Jamal asked, sitting forward eagerly in his wooden chair, ready to retrieve whatever we needed to win this fight. "They are securely locked inside your grandfather's old, heavy iron floor safe," I said, taking a slow, deep, stabilizing breath before continuing. When Calvin got severely sick a few years before he sadly passed away, he temporarily moved into your father's massive luxury house in the northern suburbs. He stubbornly insisted on bringing his personal heavy floor safe with him. Marcus had it professionally permanently bolted directly into the concrete foundation of his home office. After Calvin passed, Marcus flatly refused to let me move the safe back to my house because he claimed it was far too heavy and structurally complicated to safely extract. He simply built custom mahogany cabinetry around it to completely hide it from plain sight. "You mean the original vital documents are currently sitting securely inside my dad's sprawling house?" Jamal asked, his voice dropping to an anxious, terrified whisper. "The exact same house where Clara currently lives and breathes and plans her next sinister moves against us right this very second." "Yes," I said firmly, tightening the thick belt of my heavy brown trench coat, pulling the collar up to effectively block the bitter chill. "We have to discreetly break into your father's heavily guarded mansion tonight. I need to manually open that hidden iron safe and successfully retrieve the heavily sealed yellow envelope before exactly 9 o'clock loudly strikes on the clock tonight." "Nana, that is pure, absolute madness," Jamal stated flatly, shaking his head in sheer total disbelief at my incredibly dangerous proposal. "Dad has a state-of-the-art $1 million smart home security system fully integrated into the massive property. There are high-definition motion sensors and live feed cameras covering every single inch of that giant manicured lawn. If we step 1 foot onto the grass, the silent alarms will instantly trigger an aggressive police response within seconds. We will be caught long before we ever reach the back door of the home." I looked directly into my grandson's eyes, knowing the tremendous, massive risk I was actively asking him to confidently take for me today. "You are the absolute smartest, most capable cybersecurity major in this entire prestigious university, Jamal. You just effortlessly hacked into an offshore cartel financial ledger in less than 15 short minutes flat. Are you honestly trying to tell me you cannot temporarily disable a basic residential security system for your own loving grandmother when her entire life is completely on the line right now?" Jamal slowly let out a long, shaky breath while looking at his computer monitors. A determined, confident smile began to subtly form on his young, handsome face. "It is a highly advanced encrypted security network, Nana. But my dad was the one who personally set up the primary administrative passwords on the main server. And my dad is incredibly notoriously lazy when it comes to changing his personal digital credentials on his home devices. I know exactly how to remotely loop the camera feeds and temporarily disable the perimeter motion sensors without triggering the central alarm hub. I can buy us a 30-minute window of total absolute invisibility tonight if I set up the hack perfectly. We do not have much time left, I said, watching the digital clock on his computer monitor tick forward, perfectly counting down the remaining minutes. Clara and your father will have to leave their mansion very soon to attend the lavish charity gala at the Drake Hotel downtown. We need to hit the house the absolute second they drive away and leave the premises totally empty and completely vulnerable. Jamal quickly grabbed his sleek black laptop and shoved it forcefully into his worn gray backpack, heavily preparing for the dangerous mission ahead. He threw on a dark jacket and tossed me a pair of subtle black gloves from his messy dresser drawer. "We are going to need a reliable, fast vehicle," he said, opening his dormitory door and meticulously checking the long, empty hallway for any lingering private investigators who might still be actively watching the exit paths. I pulled the wide-brimmed hat firmly down over my face and gripped my leather satchel securely to my chest, intensely preparing for war. "I have precisely $42 in cash," I replied confidently, looking him straight in the eyes without a single trace of fear. "Let us go catch a fast cab to the suburbs and completely take back our entire family legacy tonight." The cab dropped us off 3 blocks away from the sprawling gated community in the affluent northern suburbs. The sun had completely set, leaving the manicured streets bathed in the harsh artificial glow of tall, ornate street lamps. We quickly found the discreet dark sedan Jamal had borrowed from a trusted college roommate. We sat quietly inside the cold vehicle, parked just far enough down the winding street to remain entirely invisible from the massive wrought iron gates of my son's sweeping estate. The dashboard clock glowed a menacing bright red. It was exactly 6:15 in the evening right now. We had absolutely no margin for error tonight. Jamal opened his laptop, resting it firmly on his knees. The harsh screen illuminated his intensely focused face. "I need to access the main local area network." Jamal whispered, his fingers tapping rhythmically across the keys. "My dad spared absolutely no expense on this system. It is a highly integrated military-grade network designed to instantly alert the local police department the absolute second a perimeter beam is broken." I watched the glowing lines of code reflect in his dark eyes. "Can you actually bypass it?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. Jamal smirked, a brilliant flash of pure confidence. "Dad might have bought the most expensive system on the open market, but he still uses his old college fraternity founding year as the master recovery password. It is pathetically easy to exploit." Within 3 short minutes, the screen flashed a brilliant solid green. "I am completely inside the main server," Nana Jamal said. "I am isolating the exterior security cameras right now. I am seamlessly looping the live video feeds from the past 2 hours. If Clara checks her security application on her phone now, she will only see empty lawns." I grabbed my leather satchel and prepared to open the car door. "How much time do I have exactly?" I asked, looking at his bright screen. "You have a maximum of 25 minutes before the system runs an automated diagnostic check and forces a hard manual reset," Jamal explained, looking up from the glowing monitor. "If you are not safely back in this car before that diagnostic program runs, the silent alarms will trigger immediately and alert the authorities." I nodded and stepped out into the biting evening air. I walked briskly down the silent, affluent neighborhood street tonight. The massive 3-story mansion loomed ahead, standing like an imposing modern fortress of glass and dark stone. I easily bypassed the main security gate by slipping through a decorative side hedge I knew Marcus completely ignored during his expensive landscaping audits. I walked across the perfectly manicured front lawn, staying exceptionally low to the ground to avoid any stray ambient light. I reached the massive custom oak front doors. Marcus had entirely replaced the traditional metal locks with sleek digital keypads to look impressive. But I deeply knew my son. He was a creature of absolute profound, rigid habit. He always relied on physical backups for his complex digital life. I walked quietly to the left side of the sprawling wraparound porch. There was a massive, heavy ceramic planter filled with expensive exotic green ferns. I plunged my bare hands deep into the cold, damp soil, digging near the back right corner. My fingers brushed against a small plastic waterproof container. I pulled it out and opened the extremely tight lid. Inside rested a single shiny physical override key. I wiped the dark, rich soil on my heavy trench coat and walked back to the front door rapidly. I slid the physical key into the hidden mechanical slot located at the very bottom of the modern digital keypad. The heavy front door clicked open with a soft, satisfying thud. I stepped inside and silently pulled the heavy wood shut directly behind me. The grand interior of the expensive mansion was absolutely enormous and suffocatingly quiet tonight. The sprawling foyer featured a sweeping dual staircase and imported marble floors that echoed incredibly loudly if you stepped in correctly. I took off my sturdy walking shoes, leaving them completely hidden behind a large decorative vase located very safely securely nearby me. I moved forward in my stocking feet, gliding silently across the freezing cold marble. The house smelled strongly of expensive floral diffusers and harsh chemical cleaning supplies. It smelled absolutely nothing like a real welcoming family home. It felt exactly like a sterile, unfeeling corporate museum designed to intimidate guests. I navigated the sprawling ground floor, perfectly relying heavily on my sharp memory of the original architectural blueprints Marcus had proudly shown me many years ago. I successfully passed the massive formal dining room and the pristine, untouched chef's kitchen. My ultimate target was the executive home office room downstairs. The office was located at the far end of the long, dark western hallway. Every single passing second felt like an absolute eternity. The profound total silence of the vast empty house was genuinely terrifying to experience. Every subtle creak of the central heating system sounded exactly like heavy approaching footsteps. I finally reached the heavy frosted glass doors of the executive office. I pushed them open and stepped inside very quietly. The dark room was completely dominated by a massive modern glass desk and tall floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled exclusively with unread decorative books meant for visual show. Clara had specifically decorated this room to look intensely intimidating and fiercely powerful. I absolutely did not care about her superficial aesthetic choices. I moved directly behind the large glass desk toward a beautiful antique Persian rug, completely covering the center of the dark hardwood floor. I dropped immediately to my knees and rolled the heavy rug aside entirely. Underneath the smooth wood paneling looked utterly normal to the untrained naked eye. But I remembered exactly what Calvin had personally instructed the original builders to do. I ran my trembling fingers along the microscopic seam between two specific wooden boards. I pressed down firmly on the right side of the oak wooden plank, and it popped up slightly. I pulled the false floorboard away completely, revealing the heavy, dark, solid iron dial of Calvin's personal hidden floor safe. The freezing metal dial was incredibly cold against my trembling fingertips. I briefly closed my eyes for one short second, summoning the clear, loving memory of my highly brilliant, beloved husband. Calvin was an incredibly cautious, intelligent man who absolutely never fully trusted modern digital banking systems or offshore electronic ledgers. He knew that authentic physical paper documents were always incredibly vital. He believed physical paper was the ultimate undeniable proof of real ownership in any legitimate court of law. I leaned down extremely close to the heavy dial and began to carefully input the secret numerical combination. It was definitely not a random sequence of arbitrary numbers. It was the exact heartbreaking date Calvin had suddenly unexpectedly passed away. The absolute worst day of my entire personal life was the singular vital key to saving my grand legacy tonight. I slowly spun the heavy dial right, stopping precisely on the month. I spun it left, stopping very perfectly on the day. I spun it right one final time, landing exactly on the year. I grasped the heavy iron handle firmly and pulled upward with maximum effort. The heavy dark vault door swung gracefully open with an incredibly smooth, entirely silent glide. Inside the dark, cramped cavity of the hidden safe rested several incredibly thick manila folders and a few velvet jewelry boxes Clara had obviously carelessly stored there. I completely ignored her expensive stolen trinkets and eagerly reached all the way to the very bottom of the deep iron vault. My searching hand touched exactly what I was desperately seeking tonight. It was a thick, heavy yellow envelope securely, permanently sealed with dark red wax. I pulled it rapidly out into the extremely dim ambient light of the silent office. The pristine front of the heavy envelope bore the highly official embossed seal of the Federal Historic Landmark Trust. Inside this yellow envelope were the authentic, original, irreplaceable certified deeds, proving that the Bronzeville Heritage Block was permanently protected federal land. These precise legal documents completely entirely nullified the fraudulent corporate management company Clara had aggressively stolen this morning. I clutched the heavy yellow envelope tightly against my rapidly pounding chest. I felt a massive triumphant surge of pure adrenaline flow intensely through my veins. I had the absolute undeniable proof. I had the ultimate perfect weapon to publicly permanently destroy her fraudulent $50 million corporate sale tonight. I quickly shoved the heavy yellow envelope deeply into my durable leather satchel. I pushed the iron safe door completely shut, spinning the solid metal dial rapidly to thoroughly securely lock it. I carefully replaced the false wooden floorboard, ensuring it sat perfectly flush with the surrounding wood exactly as before. I rolled the heavy antique Persian rug back very perfectly now. I stood up from the floor, brushing the invisible dust from my knees. The heavy yellow envelope containing the true deeds was resting securely inside my leather satchel. I took one final look around the dark executive office, ensuring every single detail was exactly as I had found it. The pristine glass desk, the aligned decorative books, and the heavy Persian rug were all perfectly undisturbed. I took a deep, stabilizing breath and turned toward the frosted glass doors, ready to make my silent escape back to the waiting car outside. Suddenly, the heavy mechanical hum of the massive garage doors echoed through the silent mansion. My blood instantly turned to ice water. Heavy tires rolled onto the smooth concrete floor below. A loud luxury car engine purred and then abruptly cut off. Car doors slammed shut with a sharp, aggressive echo that vibrated through the quiet floorboards. Marcus and Clara had returned home incredibly early. They were not supposed to be back from downtown for another full hour. My chest tightened painfully as I heard the distinctive electronic chime of the front door keypad accepting a passcode. I was completely, absolutely trapped deep inside the most secure room of their sprawling house. I quickly backed away from the frosted glass doors, retreating into the deepest shadows near the heavy velvet curtains. I pressed my back firmly against the cold plaster wall, holding my breath. I heard the sharp rhythmic clicking of Clara's expensive designer heels striking the polished marble floor of the grand foyer. Marcus' heavy, exhausted footsteps followed closely behind her. I carefully reached out and pulled the frosted glass door open just a tiny microscopic fraction of an inch. I needed to know exactly where they were moving. Through the incredibly narrow sliver of open space, I could see them standing in the vast illuminated hallway. Marcus dropped his expensive leather briefcase onto a side table. He looked absolutely terrible. His usually perfect posture was completely slumped, and his face was buried deeply in his hands. He looked like a man carrying the entire crushing weight of the world on his shoulders. Clara immediately moved closer to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She rested her head against his chest, looking up at him with wide, innocent, tear-filled eyes. She was shifting instantly into a brilliant, terrifying theatrical performance. "I am so incredibly sorry, Marcus," she whispered, her voice dripping with thick, manufactured sorrow. "I know today was the hardest day of your entire life. Having to finalize the medical hold for your mother was a deeply painful, necessary tragedy." Marcus let out a long, ragged sigh that sounded exactly like a sob. "I cannot stop thinking about her, Clara," he said, his voice cracking with raw, genuine emotion. "I keep thinking about how scared she must be right now, locked inside that clinical facility. She built an entire empire with her bare hands, and now she does not even recognize her own reality. I feel like I completely failed her. I promised my dad I would always protect her." "You did protect her," Marcus, Clara replied softly, stroking his face with calculated, false tenderness. "You saved her from hurting herself. Dr. Evans told us this severe dementia would make her highly paranoid and incredibly dangerous. You saw those bank statements. She was destroying everything Calvin worked for. Institutionalizing her was an act of profound mercy. It was the absolute bravest thing a loving son could ever do." I stood frozen in the dark office, listening to the monstrous lies spilling effortlessly from her lips. She was actively twisting my son's genuine, agonizing grief to serve her own sinister agenda. She had fabricated the bank statements. She had bribed the doctor. She had hired the thugs to hunt me down like an animal. And now she was standing in her lavish foyer, feeding off my son's heartbreak like an emotional vampire. "But we have to stay strong tonight," Clara continued, her tone shifting to a gentle, persuasive urgency. "We have to go to the Vanguard Charity Gala and finalize the commercial property sale. It is exactly what your father would have wanted us to do. We are saving the family business by moving forward. We are protecting her remaining legacy." Marcus nodded slowly, rubbing his tired eyes. "You are right, Clara. You have been so incredibly strong for me through this entire nightmare. I do not know how I could possibly survive this dark chapter without your support." A hot, blinding wave of pure, hardened fury washed over my entire body, pushing away any lingering traces of fear. I was not just angry anymore. I was experiencing a profound, righteous wrath. Clara was deliberately isolating Marcus, manipulating his love for me, and using his deep-seated trauma over Calvin's death to turn him into a compliant puppet. She was leading him straight toward a catastrophic $50 million federal crime that would destroy his reputation forever. I tightened my grip on the thick leather strap of my satchel. I no longer saw Marcus as a traitor. I saw him as a blind, foolish victim caught in the fatal jaws of a ruthless predator. But I was the fierce matriarch of this family, and I was about to tear those jaws completely apart tonight. "I am going to change into my formal gown," Clara said, turning gracefully away from Marcus. "The Vanguard's CEO expects us at the Drake Hotel by 8. I just need to grab the ceremonial pen from the office desk and print the final signature pages for the press photos. I will be right back, honey." My heart stopped dead in my chest. Clara was walking directly toward the executive office. I had absolutely nowhere to hide. The room had no closets, and the heavy velvet curtains were far too sheer to conceal my silhouette from the bright hallway lights that would flood the room the second she opened the doors. I was mere seconds away from being discovered. If she saw me, she would scream for Marcus. He would physically restrain me, believing he was protecting a dangerous dementia patient, and Clara would instantly call the psychiatric transport team. My entire mission would end right here on this expensive Persian rug. I pulled my emergency burner phone from my coat pocket. My hands were moving with frantic, desperate speed. I blindly mashed a single button, sending a blank text message to Jamal. It was our prearranged emergency signal. I prayed he was actively monitoring the live feed from the car parked down the street. The rhythmic clicking of Clara's heels grew louder and louder. She was exactly 10 feet away from the frosted glass doors. 8 feet, 5 feet. I braced my legs, ready to physically fight my way out of this room if I had to. I would not go down quietly. Suddenly, a massive, deafening siren ripped through the entire mansion. The state-of-the-art million-dollar smart home security system erupted into total, absolute chaos. Every single high-intensity tactical light in the sprawling house began violently strobing with blinding white flashes. The automated digital voice of the security system blasted through the hidden surround sound speakers at maximum volume. "Warning: perimeter breach detected in the East Wing guest quarters. Multiple unauthorized entries detected. Police dispatch initiated." Jamal had absolutely delivered. He had triggered a massive catastrophic system override, isolating the fake alarm to the exact opposite side of the massive property. Marcus shouted in pure shock, grabbing Clara by the shoulders and pulling her violently away from the office doors. "What is happening, Clara?" he yelled over the deafening blare of the security sirens. "The East Wing alarm just triggered. Someone is breaking into the house right now." Clara shrieked in genuine terror, her perfectly polished facade completely shattering. "The cartel," she screamed, her voice shrill with raw panic. "Marcus, they are here. They found us. Get me out of here right now. We have to leave immediately." She did not care about the ceremonial pen anymore. She did not care about printing the final signature pages. The crushing reality of her $30 million criminal debt had completely overridden her desire for a perfect public relations photo. She truly believed the ruthless offshore syndicate had finally arrived to aggressively collect her life. Marcus dragged Clara toward the front door, desperately punching codes into the main security panel to disable the deafening alarms. I did not waste a single millisecond. I turned around and sprinted silently toward the heavy glass terrace doors at the back of the dark office. I unlatched the heavy brass lock and pushed the thick glass open, stepping out into the freezing night air. I pulled the terrace doors firmly shut behind me, just as the massive security sirens abruptly cut off, leaving the house in a tense, ringing silence. I sprinted across the dark, manicured lawn, my feet flying over the damp grass. I kept my body extremely low, entirely avoiding the sweeping beams of the decorative landscape lights. I reached the tall privacy hedge and pushed my way through the thick branches, ignoring the sharp thorns tearing at my heavy trench coat. I stumbled out onto the quiet neighborhood street, gasping for air. The dark sedan was parked exactly where we left it. The passenger door swung open before I even reached the bumper. I threw myself into the front seat, slamming the door shut as Jamal instantly threw the car into drive and hit the gas pedal hard. "Did you get the documents?" Nana Jamal asked, his hands gripping the steering wheel as we sped away from the sprawling gated community. His eyes were wide with intense adrenaline. I placed my hand firmly over the heavy leather satchel, feeling the solid shape of the yellow envelope inside. "I got absolutely everything we need, Jamal," I said, my breathing slowly returning to a normal, steady rhythm. "Your distraction was perfectly timed. You saved my life back there." "I saw Clara walking straight toward the office on the bypassed camera feed," Jamal explained, shaking his head in disbelief. "I triggered the aggressive panic protocol and routed the fake breach to the east wing, just to buy you exactly 10 seconds. It was the only tactical move I had left." "It worked flawlessly," I replied, looking out the window as the affluent suburban houses blurred past us in the dark night. "But we have no time to celebrate this small victory right now. Clara and your father are completely terrified, but they will still go directly to the Drake Hotel tonight. She absolutely needs that $50 million payout to survive the cartel threat. She is more incredibly desperate now than ever before." Jamal merged the car aggressively onto the busy highway, heading straight back toward the towering, glowing skyline of downtown Chicago. I pulled down the passenger side mirror and straightened my wide-brimmed hat. I brushed the lingering dirt and debris off the lapels of my heavy trench coat. I was no longer a frightened woman hiding in the dark shadows of a stolen mansion. I was a fully armed warrior heading directly to the final battleground. "We have exactly 1 hour until the ceremonial signing begins," I said, checking my gold watch. "Clara expects to walk onto that stage and easily cement her fraudulent corporate victory in front of the wealthiest people in this entire magnificent, bustling city. She thinks she has secured her future forever without any serious consequences." Jamal pressed harder on the accelerator, weaving smoothly through the heavy evening traffic. "We are going to publicly burn her entire world to the ground, Nana," he said, his voice filled with a cold, fierce, unwavering determination. "Yes, we are, Jamal," I replied, staring at the glowing city lights directly ahead. "We are going to walk straight into the center of that grand ballroom tonight, and we are going to show the entire city exactly who owns the Bronzeville Heritage Block. She tried to completely erase my identity today. Tonight, I am going to permanently, thoroughly erase hers. Let us go to the gala right now and finish this entirely." The dark sedan tore through the night, cutting a sharp path down the bustling Chicago freeway. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching the heavy leather satchel against my chest. The thick yellow envelope inside felt like a loaded weapon. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It was exactly 8:15 in the evening. We had 45 minutes before Clara stood on that brightly lit stage and proudly signed away $50 million of protected federal land. Jamal navigated the heavy downtown traffic with intense precision. The towering skyscrapers of the financial district rose around us, glowing with cold corporate light. My mind was completely clear. The fear that had gripped me in the dark office was entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, absolute focus. I had spent 40 years surviving in the ruthless world of commercial real estate. I knew exactly how to dismantle a bad deal. We pulled onto the elegant street approaching the historic Drake Hotel. The massive building was surrounded by a fleet of black luxury vehicles and aggressive valet attendants. I could instantly see that Vanguard Developments had spared absolutely no expense tonight. There were private security guards stationed at every single entrance, wearing dark tailored suits and clear earpieces. They were carefully checking every guest against a strict digital registry. Jamal parked the sedan in a quiet, dim alcove just down the street from the main valet line. He immediately pulled his sleek black laptop from his backpack and flipped the screen open. The harsh blue light illuminated his deeply concentrated face. "The security network here is incredibly tight," Nana, he said, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. Vanguard brought in their own private corporate security team to handle the main doors. They are cross-referencing every single guest with a secure digital cloud server. If your name is not explicitly on that list, they will physically remove you from the premises before you even reach the grand ballroom. "Then you need to put my name on that list, Jamal," I replied, perfectly calm. I reached into the back seat and retrieved a protective garment bag we had quickly grabbed from his dormitory earlier today. Inside was my vintage tailored designer suit. It was the exact same immaculate outfit I wore when Calvin and I successfully negotiated our very first major commercial lease. It was my absolute armor. I carefully slipped off my heavy brown trench coat and put on the elegant suit jacket, smoothing the crisp fabric. I adjusted the matching skirt and fastened my simple, elegant pearl necklace. I completely transformed myself from a frightened fugitive into the formidable corporate matriarch of the Bronzeville Heritage Block. "I am infiltrating their primary guest database right now," Jamal whispered, completely absorbed in the cascading lines of green code on his screen. "The hotel uses a standard encrypted hospitality network, but Vanguard attached a custom verification protocol. I just need to isolate the active guest list and inject a new VIP profile." I watched the digital clock on his screen tick forward perfectly. It was 8:25. Every single passing minute felt incredibly heavy. Clara and Marcus were already inside that massive building, likely shaking hands with powerful local politicians and wealthy billionaires. They were proudly celebrating a monumental financial victory that was actually a devastating criminal fraud. "I am completely inside the registry," Jamal announced, a fierce, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He rapidly typed my full legal name into the secure digital database. "I am designating you as an elite legacy investor. You now have highest-level VIP clearance. The security tablets at the front doors will verify you as an expected honored guest." "Excellent work, Jamal," I said, gripping the handle of my leather satchel. "Now you must secure access to the main ballroom audio-visual network. When I finally step onto that stage to publicly confront Clara, I absolutely need you to broadcast her encrypted offshore ledgers and the forged medical documents on the massive presentation screens. I need every single wealthy investor in that room to clearly see exactly who she truly is." Jamal quickly switched to a new terminal window, launching a sophisticated secondary hacking protocol. "The ballroom presentation network is entirely separate from the main hotel registry," he explained, his eyes scanning the complex data structure. "I am setting up a localized remote access relay. I can easily hijack the primary projector screens from the parking lot. Whenever you give me the exact verbal signal, I will instantly flood the massive screens with her illegal cartel debt records." I checked my watch. It was 8:35. The time for quiet preparation was officially over. I opened the car door and stepped out into the crisp evening air. My posture was perfectly straight, and my head was held incredibly high. I did not look like an elderly woman running for her life. I looked exactly like a powerful corporate executive arriving to completely dominate a critical business negotiation. "Wait here and keep the engine running," I instructed Jamal. "Monitor the live audio feed from my cell phone. When you hear the Vanguard executive prepare to finalize the signing, you must be completely ready to execute the digital strike." "I promise I will not fail you," Nana Jamal said, his voice filled with profound, unwavering loyalty. I closed the car door and walked confidently down the affluent street toward the blazing bright lights of the Grand Hotel entrance. The wealthy elite of Chicago milled around the velvet ropes, displaying their expensive designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. I seamlessly merged into the glamorous crowd, projecting an aura of absolute, undeniable authority. As I approached the main entrance, a massive security guard stepped directly into my path. He raised his hand and looked at me with a stern, aggressive expression. He held a glowing digital tablet securely in his left hand. "Excuse me, madam," the heavy-set guard said, his tone completely devoid of any basic politeness. "This is an exclusive private corporate event. I need to see your official digital invitation and a valid photo identification right now." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I looked at him with the precise, intimidating glare I had perfected over 40 years of managing difficult, uncooperative commercial tenants. I slowly raised my chin and spoke with a cold, booming authority that instantly commanded absolute respect. "I am Josephine Caldwell," I stated, my voice cutting sharply through the ambient noise of the busy crowd. "I am the primary legacy investor for the Bronzeville Commercial Initiative. I was explicitly requested by the Vanguard Executive Board to be present for the final monumental signing tonight. I strongly suggest you check your primary VIP registry before you ever dare to speak to me with such shocking disrespect again." The sheer force of my absolute confidence completely rattled him. His aggressive posture instantly faltered. He nervously looked down at his digital tablet and rapidly typed my name into the search bar. I watched his eyes widen as the fake VIP profile Jamal had masterfully injected flashed brightly onto his screen, perfectly validating my demanding claim. My profound apologies, Mrs. Caldwell. The guard stammered quickly, stepping aside and opening the heavy velvet rope to grant me immediate access. I did not recognize you. Please proceed directly to the grand ballroom down the main hall. I did not offer him a polite smile or a word of thanks. I simply walked past him, entering the opulent, sparkling lobby of the historic hotel. The interior was breathtakingly lavish, featuring massive crystal chandeliers and pristine marble columns. The air was filled with the soft, elegant sound of a live string quartet and the muted chatter of incredibly wealthy people networking. I moved precisely through the crowded lobby, keeping my leather satchel firmly pressed against my side. I navigated the long, ornate hallway, guided by large, polished brass signs pointing toward the main ballroom event. My heart beat with a slow, steady, powerful rhythm. Clara genuinely thought she had completely erased me from existence. She thought she had buried me alive under a mountain of forged medical paperwork. She had absolutely no idea the devastating storm that was about to violently crash through her pristine, fragile world. I finally reached the massive, towering mahogany doors of the grand ballroom. 2 more security guards stood at strict attention, but they completely ignored me, assuming I had already been heavily vetted at the main entrance. I took one final deep breath, gathering every single ounce of strength and dignity I possessed. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped gracefully into the massive room. The ballroom was absolutely magnificent. Hundreds of elegantly dressed guests sat at large circular tables covered in pristine white linen and expensive floral centerpieces. A massive elevated stage dominated the far end of the vast room. 2 gigantic digital presentation screens flanked the stage, currently displaying the sleek, modern architectural mock-ups for the new Vanguard Tech campus. I stood quietly in the deep shadows near the back entrance, carefully scanning the crowded room. It did not take me long to locate my primary targets. Clara and Marcus were seated at the central VIP table directly in front of the elevated stage. Clara wore an incredibly expensive shimmering silver gown that caught the bright stage lights perfectly. She was laughing brightly and charmingly, chatting with a group of prominent, wealthy investors. She looked absolutely radiant and entirely victorious. She looked exactly like a woman who believed she had just successfully escaped a violent, deadly cartel and secured a massive $50 million fortune. Marcus sat quietly beside her, looking profoundly exhausted and deeply broken. He forced a weak, polite smile whenever someone spoke to him, but his eyes were completely hollow. My brilliant, naive son was actively mourning the mother he foolishly believed he had just locked away in a terrifying psychiatric facility. I felt a sharp, painful ache in my chest for his profound, genuine sorrow, but I immediately pushed it away. He needed to learn this hard, terrible lesson today. The live string quartet suddenly stopped playing. The ambient chatter of the massive ballroom slowly faded into an expectant, hushed silence. The bright house lights dimmed slightly, and a powerful spotlight illuminated the center of the grand stage. A tall, distinguished man, wearing an immaculate tailored tuxedo, confidently walked up the side steps and approached the central podium. It was Mr. Sterling, the ruthless billionaire chief executive officer of Vanguard Developments. He adjusted the microphone and looked out over the massive crowd of wealthy elite investors with a wide, triumphant smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Sterling began, his booming voice echoing clearly through the massive ballroom speakers. "Thank you all for joining us tonight for this truly historic, momentous occasion. Vanguard Developments has always been fully committed to aggressively modernizing the magnificent city of Chicago. Tonight we are taking a massive, unprecedented leap forward." I slowly began to walk down the center aisle of the ballroom. I moved with deliberate, measured steps, keeping my eyes locked entirely on the stage. The thick yellow envelope securely hidden inside my leather satchel felt like a burning heavy stone. "Tonight we are officially acquiring the historic Bronzeville commercial sector," Mr. Sterling announced, the crowd erupting into polite, wealthy applause. "We are permanently transforming that outdated neighborhood into a state-of-the-art $50 million commercial technology campus. This monumental project will define the future of our great city." I continued walking silently down the long, carpeted aisle. I was halfway to the stage now. Clara was completely focused on the speaking CEO, entirely unaware that her ultimate doom was steadily approaching from directly behind her. "And to make this historic acquisition officially complete," Mr. Sterling continued, gesturing warmly toward the central VIP table, "I would like to invite our esteemed honored guests to the stage right now. Please welcome Marcus Caldwell and his brilliant wife Clara, who is acting as the primary legal conservator for this massive land transfer tonight." Clara stood up gracefully, smoothing her expensive shimmering gown. She gently took Marcus by the hand, leading my broken son toward the bright stage steps. They walked up and stood directly beside the billionaire executive. A sleek silver tray holding the final binding transfer deeds and an expensive ceremonial signing pen was brought to the podium. Clara reached out her elegant hand to pick up the silver pen. Her face radiated pure, absolute, triumphant victory. She was exactly one single signature away from completing her monstrous fraudulent theft and paying off her deadly cartel debt. I stopped walking. I was standing directly in the middle of the main center aisle, exactly 30 feet away from the bright stage. I firmly gripped my wooden cane and struck the polished marble floor with a sharp, deafening crack that completely silenced the entire massive ballroom immediately. "Put the pen down, Clara. I am certainly not the one who is about to lose absolutely everything tonight." Clara was hyperventilating now, gripping the microphone stand so tightly, her knuckles turned completely stark white. "I said grab her!" she screamed again, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "She is completely delusional. Do not let her take another step forward. She is trying to violently ruin this historic corporate investment." At her frantic, aggressive command, 3 massive private security guards burst from the shadows near the back entrance. They were enormous, intimidating men wearing dark tactical suits and clear communication earpieces. Now they sprinted heavily down the main center aisle, their heavy boots thudding loudly against the polished marble floor. They were moving with ruthless professional efficiency, intending to tackle me violently to the ground and forcibly drag me out of the building, just as Clara desperately wanted. Any ordinary elderly woman would have completely panicked. Any normal person would have turned around and frantically tried to run away from the massive approaching threats. But I had spent my entire adult life standing my ground against powerful, intimidating men who aggressively tried to force me out of my own territory. I had often faced down ruthless mobsters, corrupt city politicians, and vicious banking executives. 3 oversized hotel security guards were absolutely nothing compared to the battles Calvin and I had fought to protect the Bronzeville Heritage Block. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I stood my ground, planting my feet firmly on the carpeted floor, as the 3 massive guards closed in on me. Reaching out their large, heavy hands to grab my arms, I swiftly raised my wooden cane straight into the air. "Do not dare to touch me," I commanded. I did not scream loudly. The billionaire chief executive officer froze completely. His heavy silver pen hovered less than a single inch above the thick signature line on the official transfer deed. He slowly turned his head to look directly down at me from the elevated stage. His dark eyes narrowed into thin, dangerous slits. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom was absolutely deafening. You could hear a pin drop on the polished marble floor. The entire crowd of wealthy elite investors and local politicians held their collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Who exactly are you, madam?" Mr. Sterling demanded, his deep voice echoing loudly through the microphone system. "And what specific federal crime are you recklessly accusing me of committing tonight?" I did not break eye contact with him for a single fraction of a second. "I am Josephine Caldwell," I stated proudly, lifting my chin. "I am the sole authentic owner of the Bronzeville Heritage Block, and I am standing here tonight to personally inform you that you are currently participating in a massive coordinated criminal fraud." Clara let out a sharp, hysterical gasp. She lunged forward, trying to physically block the microphone from Mr. Sterling. "Do not listen to a single word she says," Clara screamed, her voice completely frantic and incredibly shrill. "She is a deeply sick woman. She escaped from a locked psychiatric facility this morning. My husband and I hold the permanent legal conservatorship over her entire estate. We have the absolute legal authority to execute this commercial transaction tonight." I let out a low, sharp laugh that carried clearly across the vast, silent room. "You hold absolutely nothing." "Clara," I said, my voice radiating pure, unadulterated power. "You spent an incredible amount of time and money forging fake medical documents to steal a management company. You successfully hijacked Washington Real Estate LLC this morning. You effectively locked me out of my own corporate bank accounts, and you genuinely believed you had brilliantly secured your $50 million prize." Marcus stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. His face was completely pale. "Mom, "What are you talking about, Marcus?" stammered, gripping the edge of the glass podium to support his trembling weight. "Clara showed me the official legal paperwork. You signed the LLC over to us because your memory was severely failing." I looked up at my brilliant, naive son, feeling a mixture of profound pity and righteous fury. "I never signed a single document." "Marcus," I said firmly, "your greedy, desperate wife forged my signature and bribed a corrupt doctor to completely erase my legal identity today. She actively weaponized your unresolved grief over your father's death to turn you into her compliant, foolish puppet. She desperately needed you to blindly support her permanent conservatorship so she could immediately sell our historic family properties to Vanguard Developments tonight." Marcus physically recoiled, stepping away from Clara as if she had suddenly caught fire. Clara aggressively grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured fingers digging deeply into his expensive tuxedo jacket. "Do not listen to her, Marcus," Clara pleaded, her eyes darting wildly around the silent ballroom. "She is completely delusional. The corporate lawyers thoroughly verified everything. The LLC gives us total, absolute control of the commercial property." I turned my fierce, unwavering gaze directly back to the Vanguard Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Sterling. "I suggest you ask your elite team of highly paid corporate lawyers to actively review the original incorporation papers from 20 years ago," I said, my voice booming with undeniable authority. Because my late husband Calvin was a brilliant, cautious tax attorney. He knew that ruthless, greedy people would eventually try to steal the valuable commercial properties we worked so incredibly hard to acquire, so 2 decades ago, we set a permanent, unbreakable legal trap. Clara proudly stole Washington Real Estate LLC today. But that specific limited liability company does not physically own a single square inch of the Bronzeville land. The entire grand ballroom erupted into shocked, chaotic whispers. Wealthy investors leaned forward in their chairs, eager to witness the massive corporate train wreck unfolding live on stage. "What exactly does the LLC own?" Then Mr. Sterling demanded, his face turning a dark, angry shade of crimson. "It owns the routine neighborhood, janitorial contracts, and the decorative potted plants resting on the neighborhood sidewalks." I announced, a fierce, triumphant smile spreading across my face. "It owns the exterior window washing agreements and the seasonal holiday decorations." "You did not just buy a $50 million prime commercial real estate location, Mr. Sterling. You literally just bought a collection of plastic trash cans and a fleet of commercial street sweepers." Mr. Sterling dropped the heavy silver pen onto the glass podium as if it were burning hot. He turned a furious, deadly glare toward Clara. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, his voice vibrating with absolute rage. Clara was shaking uncontrollably now. Her expensive, shimmering silver gown trembled as she desperately tried to find a way out of the inescapable corner I had securely locked her inside. "She is lying," Clara screamed, her voice cracking completely. "The LLC holds the primary master deeds to the entire city block. Provided you with the certified digital copies. Digital copies can be expertly forged by a desperate woman running out of time," I replied smoothly. Walking directly toward the steps of the elevated stage, I reached into my heavy leather satchel and pulled out the thick yellow envelope containing the authentic original documents. I broke the dark red wax seal and pulled out the crisp, heavy parchment papers. I held them up high for every single person in the massive ballroom to clearly see. 2 decades ago, my late husband and I transferred the actual physical real estate of the Bronzeville block into an irrevocable federal historic landmark trust. I declared, my voice ringing with immense proud finality. "It is permanently protected government land. It absolutely cannot be sold. It cannot be demolished for a modern tech campus. And it most certainly cannot be transferred by a fraudulent state level." Power of attorney document. I walked up the carpeted stairs and stepped proudly onto the grand stage. I walked directly past my terrified daughter-in-law and handed the original certified trust documents firmly into Mr. Sterling's waiting hands. He rapidly scanned the heavy parchment paper, his eyes widening in pure, absolute horror as he recognized the undeniable, authentic federal seals. "You did not just attempt to finalize a fraudulent $50 million corporate acquisition tonight, Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice low and incredibly sharp. You transferred a massive preliminary earnest money deposit to a highly desperate criminal. According to your own highly publicized press release, you wired a $5 million non-refundable cash deposit directly to Clara's private offshore account this morning to rapidly secure this exclusive contract. Mr. Sterling looked up from the authentic parchment papers, his chest heaving with intense, unbridled fury. He realized instantly that his massive multi-billion-dollar corporation had just been spectacularly humiliated in front of the entire elite financial community of Chicago. He had been brilliantly conned by a desperate woman who used his own aggressive corporate greed completely against him. "You told my legal team you had absolute clear title to this land," Mr. Sterling growled, stepping aggressively toward Clara. "You assured me the property was entirely free of any federal encumbrances. You took $5 million of my corporate funds today." Clara backed away, her expensive heels catching awkwardly on the thick stage carpet. She held her hands up in a frantic defensive gesture. "I can entirely explain everything," she stammered, her eyes darting toward the exits. "The federal trust can be easily dissolved. We just need a little more time to completely process the legal paperwork." "There is absolutely no more time, Clara," I said, projecting my voice clearly to the captivated audience watching below us. "The federal trust is permanently irrevocable. You successfully stole a completely worthless management shell company to falsely legitimize a massive wire fraud scheme. You took a $5 million corporate deposit for government-protected land. You have absolutely zero legal right to ever sell." Marcus stood completely frozen on the stage, watching his beautiful, expensive wife completely unravel before his very eyes. The blinding, absolute truth was finally crashing down upon him. He had willingly, actively helped her try to lock his own loving mother inside a terrifying mental institution. He had foolishly, blindly believed every single calculated tear she shed. And now he was standing on a highly public stage, securely tethered to a massive, monumental federal crime. I stood tall, looking at them both, feeling the immense power of absolute justice finally arriving perfectly to completely destroy their entire fraudulent lives tonight. It was time for the ultimate, incredible, deeply satisfying ending to their terrible, agonizing, carefully constructed criminal nightmare right now. The trap was closed perfectly, entirely successfully today, permanently. Mr. Sterling froze, his hand hovering just an inch above the thick parchment paper. He was a man who built a multi-billion-dollar empire by aggressively calculating every single risk. When a woman crashes a highly secure gala and boldly threatens federal prison, a smart billionaire absolutely stops and listens. He slowly lowered the silver pen and placed it back onto the sleek glass podium. Clara let out a sharp, frantic gasp. "Mr. Sterling, please," she begged, her voice trembling with raw, desperate panic. "You cannot listen to her. She is incredibly sick. She does not understand modern business. Just sign the transfer deed right now and we can finalize the campus development. I have the legally binding conservatorship right here in my hand." She reached out frantically, trying to grab the silver pen from the podium herself. Mr. Sterling smoothly pulled the heavy parchment contract out of her immediate reach. He turned his cold, calculating eyes away from my terrified daughter-in-law and looked directly down at me standing in the center aisle. "Explain yourself, Mrs. Caldwell," Mr. Sterling demanded, his deep voice echoing loudly through the silent grand ballroom. "You just made a very serious threat regarding federal prison time. I do not take threats lightly. Why exactly should I not finalize this $50 million transaction right now?" I gripped my wooden cane and slowly walked up the carpeted steps leading onto the brightly lit stage. My heavy leather satchel rested securely against my hip. Marcus tried to step forward to intercept me, but I shot him a fiercely sharp glare that instantly froze him perfectly in his tracks. He had spent his entire life running from conflict, but tonight he was going to stand there and witness the absolute truth. I stepped up to the glass podium, standing directly across from the ruthless Vanguard Chief Executive Officer. I did not look at Clara. She was already entirely irrelevant to the high-stakes business negotiation happening right now. "You pride yourself on being a meticulous corporate visionary. Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and undeniably powerful. "You claim Vanguard Developments conducts exhaustive, rigorous legal research before acquiring any commercial property. But your elite team of expensive corporate lawyers failed you completely today. They allowed you to do business with a desperate, cornered fraud." Clara let out a loud, hysterical sob. "Do not listen to her," she screamed, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. I have the signed medical power of attorney. I have the total legal right to sell Washington Real Estate LLC today. It is a completely binding corporate sale. I turned my head very slowly and finally looked directly at the vicious woman who had tried to lock me in a padded cell. "Yes, Clara," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm pitch. "You brilliantly forged my personal signature on fraudulent medical documents. You successfully bribed a corrupt doctor to declare me legally incompetent. You aggressively stole the executive control of Washington Real Estate LLC this morning. You thought you were incredibly clever. You genuinely believed you had effortlessly outsmarted a tired old woman. I turned my attention back to the billionaire executive. But you made one massive fatal mistake, Clara. You did not bother to read the foundational incorporation history of our commercial empire. You completely underestimated my late husband, Calvin." A wave of frantic, confused whispers instantly swept through the massive crowd of wealthy investors filling the ballroom. Mr. Sterling crossed his arms over his tailored tuxedo, his expression hardening into dark suspicion. "What exactly does your late husband have to do with this current real estate acquisition, Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked sharply. "Everything," I replied, pulling the heavy leather satchel around to the front of my body. Calvin was an old-school tax attorney who spent 40 years aggressively protecting Black-owned businesses in the Bronzeville district. He knew that eventually wealthy predatory developers like you would try to sweep in and aggressively bulldoze our thriving historic community to build soulless corporate high-rises. He also knew that greedy, desperate family members might eventually try to sell our precious legacy for quick, easy cash. So 20 years ago, Calvin and I strategically set a permanent ironclad legal trap. I unbuckled the heavy leather flap of my satchel and reached deep inside. My fingers firmly grasped the thick yellow envelope sealed with dark red wax. I pulled it out into the bright stage lights and placed it directly onto the sleek glass podium right next to the fraudulent Vanguard contract. Washington Real Estate LLC does not physically own a single inch of the Bronzeville commercial block, I announced, my voice booming with undeniable absolute authority. It never did. That specific management company only owns the local janitorial service contracts, the basic building maintenance agreements, and the decorative potted plants sitting in the lobby. Clara's mouth fell completely open. Her face turned the color of pale chalk. She stared at the yellow envelope like it was a highly explosive bomb. Marcus let out a sharp, confused gasp, stepping closer to the podium. "Mom, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking with raw disbelief. I ignored my son and maintained intense, direct eye contact with the Vanguard executive. 2 decades ago, Calvin legally moved the entire physical real estate of the Bronzeville Heritage Block, including the land, the building foundations, and the historic storefronts, into an irrevocable federal historic landmark trust, I stated clearly and proudly. It is permanently government-protected land. It absolutely cannot be sold. It cannot be legally demolished. And it most certainly cannot be rapidly transferred by a forged medical power of attorney. I reached out and forcefully broke the dark red wax seal on the thick yellow envelope. I pulled out the crisp, authentic original trust deeds, bearing the heavily embossed official seals of the federal government. I slid the undeniable proof directly across the glass podium, stopping right in front of Mr. Sterling. "You did not just buy a $50 million piece of prime commercial real estate tonight, Mr. Sterling," I said, watching his eyes rapidly scan the dense legal text. "You were about to buy a completely worthless property management contract and a handful of used mops." The billionaire executive aggressively grabbed the certified federal documents from the podium. His eyes darted frantically across the complex legal paragraphs, verifying the undeniable authentic government seals and the restrictive covenant language. His hands actually began to physically shake with pure, unadulterated corporate rage as the catastrophic reality of the situation fully dawned on him. Clara desperately grabbed his arm. "Mr. Sterling, please," she begged, her voice shrinking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "We can fix this. I am the legal conservator. I can legally break the trust. I can get a judge to overturn the historic designation. Just sign the preliminary transfer so we can process the initial funds tonight. I need those funds right now." Mr. Sterling violently yanked his arm away from her frantic grasp, as if she were carrying a highly infectious, deadly disease. He slammed the certified federal documents back down onto the glass podium with a loud, echoing crack. "You cannot break an irrevocable federal historic trust, you absolute staggering fool!" he roared, his deep voice vibrating with terrifying billionaire fury. "This land belongs to the Federal Preservation Registry. It is permanently protected by the United States government. The legal jurisdiction is entirely, completely out of state hands. Even if you actually had a valid power of attorney, you have absolutely zero legal right to sell this physical property. Clara stumbled backward, her expensive designer heels catching on the carpeted stage. "No," she whispered, covering her face with her shaking hands. "No, this cannot be happening. This is not real. The LLC was supposed to hold the real estate assets. The lawyers promised me the LLC held the real estate assets. Your corrupt lawyers only checked the superficial state level, corporate registry," I replied, stepping aggressively into her personal space. "They did not bother to check the Federal Historic Land Archives because they were arrogant and lazy, just like you, Clara." I turned back to the furious Vanguard executive, delivering the final devastating blow. "There is one more extremely pressing issue you need to immediately address, Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my tone incredibly sharp and precise. "According to the preliminary acquisition contract your legal team filed this morning, Vanguard Development successfully wired a $5 million non-refundable earnest money deposit directly into an escrow account controlled exclusively by Clara." Mr. Sterling's face turned a dangerous, violent shade of deep purple. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might physically shatter. "Yes, we did," he growled, stepping aggressively toward Clara. "That massive deposit was legally required to secure exclusive negotiating rights for the tech campus development tonight." "Well, I highly suggest you check the current status of your corporate funds," I announced loudly, making sure every single wealthy investor in the grand ballroom heard my next words perfectly clearly. Because Clara did not secure any exclusive negotiating rights with your money today. She just aggressively committed massive federal wire fraud. She took your $5 million non-refundable deposit for federal land she has absolutely no legal right to ever sell. The entire ballroom erupted into absolute chaotic pandemonium. Wealthy investors gasped loudly. Prominent politicians began frantically whispering to their aides. Several aggressive business reporters instantly raised their cameras, their bright flashes illuminating the incredibly tense scene on the elevated stage. Mr. Sterling lunged forward, towering intimidatingly over my terrified daughter-in-law. "Where is my money, Clara?" he roared, his voice echoing violently through the heavy microphone system. "Where is my $5 million corporate deposit right now? You are going to reverse that wire transfer this exact second, or I will personally see you thrown into a federal maximum security prison for the rest of your miserable life." Clara broke down into total uncontrollable hysterics. She fell hard onto her knees on the bright stage, her expensive glittering gown pooling around her trembling body. "I cannot reverse the transfer," she screamed, tears aggressively streaming down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. "I do not have the money anymore. I already sent it all away." "What do you mean you sent it away?" Mr. Sterling yelled, waving his arms in pure aggressive disbelief. "We wired those funds into a secure domestic escrow account exactly 8 hours ago. I wired the entire deposit to an offshore private equity group in the Cayman Islands." Clara sobbed hysterically, clutching desperately at the fabric of her ruined designer dress. "I had to pay them today. I had to send the funds immediately. If I did not send the $5 million by 5 o'clock this evening, they were going to brutally murder me tonight." Marcus stepped forward, his entire body violently shaking with profound, horrified realization. He stared down at his weeping, desperate wife as if he were looking at a complete, terrifying stranger. "What offshore group, Clara?" he asked, his voice barely a hollow whisper. "Who is trying to murder you? What are you talking about?" She looked up at my deeply broken son, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She opened her mouth to speak, but she could not form the words. She knew her massive, intricate web of lies had completely, entirely collapsed. She had successfully stolen $5 million from one of the most powerful, ruthless billionaires in Chicago, and she had already given every single penny of it to a violently dangerous international crime syndicate. She was absolutely, undeniably destroyed. I stood tall and perfectly composed on the brightly lit stage, looking down at the total ruin of the woman who had proudly tried to erase my entire existence this morning. She thought she was the smartest predator in the city. She forgot that I am the architect of Bronzeville. I do not just survive the storm, I control the lightning. The silence that followed my declaration shattered into a million sharp, jagged pieces. The grand ballroom of the historic Drake Hotel transformed instantly from a sophisticated high society charity gala into a spectacular theater of sheer corporate panic. Wealthy real estate magnates scrambled away from the elevated stage as if the polished marble floor itself had suddenly caught fire. Elite Vanguard Developments board members frantically pulled out their expensive cell phones, barking aggressive urgent orders to their crisis management teams. The elegant string quartet had completely abandoned their wooden instruments, fleeing quickly through the velvet-draped service doors. Flashbulbs from the local business press exploded rapidly, capturing every single humiliating second of the catastrophic multi-million-dollar collapse, unfolding violently before their widened, astonished eyes. Mr. Sterling was absolutely not a man who ever accepted public defeat gracefully. He turned his broad back on Clara, completely dismissing her desperate sobbing, and marched directly to the edge of the glass podium. He forcefully pulled a sleek black phone from his tailored tuxedo pocket and bypassed his local security detail entirely. He called his elite federal legal team, placing the urgent call loudly on speakerphone, so his furious voice thundered aggressively across the chaotic room. He commanded his chief financial officer to immediately trace the $5 million earnest money wire transfer. He demanded that his ruthless corporate lawyers instantly freeze every single financial asset remotely associated with the fraudulent Washington Real Estate LLC. He practically crushed his mobile phone tightly within his large, powerful right hand. "I want the Federal Bureau of Investigation contacted this exact second," Mr. Sterling roared, his face still flushed with deep, violent purple rage. "I want a massive federal wire fraud injunction filed against Clara Caldwell before she can even attempt to leave this building tonight. She maliciously accepted a $5 million corporate deposit for federally protected landmark property. I want her completely, utterly, legally destroyed by morning. She will fully understand what happens when you aggressively manipulate Vanguard Developments." Clara remained violently crumpled on the carpeted stage floor, her shimmering silver designer gown aggressively soaking up the sticky spilled champagne from a broken glass nearby. She was frantically muttering incoherent, desperate phrases to herself, her perfectly manicured hands pulling aggressively at her own styled dark hair. The carefully constructed, flawless facade of the brilliant high society socialite had completely burned away entirely. It left only a terrified, cornered thief facing absolute permanent ruin. She painfully crawled across the rough stage carpet toward the furious billionaire executive, begging him to miraculously understand that she was merely a helpless victim of unfortunate financial circumstance. "Please, you have to legally halt the federal injunction," Clara screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, horrifying pitch that echoed violently off the high ballroom ceiling. "The offshore syndicate aggressively forced my hand today. They ruthlessly threatened to brutally destroy my entire family if I did not produce the massive $30 million principal payment by midnight tonight. I had absolutely no other choice but to desperately take your deposit money. You possess billions of dollars, Mr. Sterling. $5 million is absolutely nothing to your massive corporate empire, but it is my literal life on the line right now. Please show me some basic human mercy tonight." Mr. Sterling looked down at the weeping, crawling woman with a gaze of pure, unfiltered corporate absolute disgust. "Your catastrophic personal debts to violent offshore cartels are absolutely none of my concern, you pathetic, greedy fraud," he stated, his voice slicing through the heavy, tense air like a sharpened steel blade. "You brazenly chose to aggressively steal from Vanguard Developments. You brazenly chose to deeply humiliate me in front of the most prominent wealthy investors in Chicago. You will spend the next 20 years rotting in a federal maximum security prison cell while your violent offshore creditors ruthlessly strip your remaining family of every single asset they possess." The sheer terrifying magnitude of the massive federal crime finally completely registered in Clara's panicked, frantic mind. Wire fraud involving elite billionaires and protected federal property carried mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines that would guarantee she never saw freedom again. She loudly wailed a deeply guttural, horrifying sound of pure, sheer, absolute terror. She frantically twisted her body around on the carpeted stage, reaching out her trembling arms toward her highly successful millionaire husband. "Marcus, please save me," Clara begged violently, choking on her own bitter, salty tears. "You are incredibly wealthy, Marcus. You can easily write a massive check right now to fully reimburse Vanguard Developments tonight. You can rapidly hire the absolute best elite criminal defense lawyers in the entire state to protect me from the federal authorities. Tell them I was severely confused. Tell them I made a frantic, desperate mistake because I was deeply terrified for our family. Please, Marcus, you loudly promised to always protect me." Marcus stood completely, absolutely frozen near the edge of the bright stage, watching the elegant woman he profoundly loved rapidly degrade into a hysterical, confessing criminal. The heavy protective blindfold he had willfully, comfortably worn for so many long years was violently, aggressively ripped from his tired eyes. He stared down at Clara, thrashing pathetically on the rough stage carpet, and then he slowly turned his head to look up directly at me, standing perfectly still behind the sleek glass podium. For the very first time in over an entire year, my son finally truly looked at me, without the deeply manipulative, highly toxic filter his greedy wife had deliberately placed over his vision. He finally clearly saw the pristine, unwavering, sharp clarity in my dark eyes. He noticed my perfectly immaculate vintage designer suit and my strong, proud, rigid posture. He actively listened to the steady, undeniably powerful rhythm of my breathing. He realized in one single devastating, world-shattering moment that I was entirely, perfectly, unequivocally sane. I was not suffering from severe late-stage dementia. I was not having dangerous, violent, paranoid hallucinations. I was not randomly wandering around the neighborhood hopelessly lost and severely confused. I was the exact same brilliant, formidable matriarch who had successfully, ruthlessly negotiated massive commercial real estate deals for 4 incredible decades. Marcus physically staggered backward as the horrific, crushing realization hit him like a speeding freight train. He forcefully grabbed the heavy velvet curtain near the side steps, struggling to remain standing as his entire reality violently collapsed around him. The puzzle pieces of the last 2 years rapidly slammed together in his devastated mind, creating a terrifying, perfectly clear picture of pure, unadulterated evil. He suddenly remembered the incredibly large, mysterious monthly allowance checks Clara claimed she was faithfully sending to my bank account. He remembered how Clara always aggressively insisted on handling my personal finances because she claimed I was becoming far too forgetful. He remembered the highly suspicious private medical evaluation from a doctor he had never personally met or spoken to. He remembered how Clara expertly cried and deeply manipulated his profound, lingering trauma over his father's tragic, unexpected death. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with sheer, raw, absolute devastation. He pressed his shaking hands against his pale face, pulling tightly at his own skin, as if trying to physically wake himself up from a horrific, endless nightmare. "You lied to me about absolutely everything. You completely fabricated her severe medical condition. You intentionally, aggressively starved my own mother of her basic survival funds." "I did it entirely for us!" Marcus Clara screamed frantically, crawling toward his expensive leather shoes. "I did it to aggressively protect our lavish, beautiful lifestyle. We needed the $50 million to permanently clear the massive syndicate debt. She is just an old, stubborn woman who was stubbornly hoarding prime commercial real estate while we were desperately, actively drowning." Marcus looked down at his sobbing, desperate wife with a deeply haunting expression of pure, absolute revulsion. "You hired violent physical thugs to aggressively lock my own mother inside a terrifying clinical psychiatric ward today," he stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifyingly calm pitch that echoed my own formidable tone. "You actively planned to heavily, maliciously sedate the very woman who sacrificed absolutely everything to fund my first initial software startup. You were going to completely, permanently erase her entire existence, just to temporarily save your own pathetic, greedy life." He forcefully ripped his expensive tailored suit jacket away from her desperate, grasping hands, stepping far away from her, as if her very touch was highly physically toxic. "You are a completely remorseless, absolute monster, Clara. You nearly violently destroyed our entire family today. I will absolutely never, ever write a single check to help you escape this catastrophic mess. You are going entirely to federal prison, and I hope they permanently lose the key." Clara let out a final, ear-piercing, devastating shriek of pure, total defeat, collapsing completely flat onto the stage floor. The heavy, chaotic noise of the panicked ballroom crowd swelled aggressively around us, but I remained standing perfectly, completely still behind the sleek glass podium, watching the absolute total destruction of my vicious enemies. The massive, intricate house of cards Clara had so carefully, meticulously built over 2 long years had just spectacularly, violently, completely burned directly to the ground in less than 10 short minutes. I stood silently observing the profound wreckage I had successfully orchestrated, I felt absolutely no pity for the weeping woman on the floor. She had callously attempted to rip away my freedom, my dignity, and my entire 40-year legacy. She had severely underestimated the boundless deep strength of a mother protecting her life work. Marcus slowly raised his tear-filled eyes back to mine. The profound, heavy sorrow radiating from his broken posture was genuinely agonizing to witness, but I knew it was absolutely medically necessary for his ultimate survival. He had to fully experience this sharp, devastating pain to completely break free from her toxic, venomous spell. The loud, approaching wail of multiple heavy police sirens suddenly echoed from the busy downtown streets outside, growing incredibly louder and more aggressive by the second. The federal authorities were finally arriving to aggressively clean up the massive, shattered ruins of Clara's destroyed life tonight forever now. Marcus spun around so fast he nearly lost his footing on the carpeted stairs. He stared down at me with wide, terrified eyes, his face draining of all color. He looked absolutely bewildered, entirely incapable of processing how his mother, who was supposedly locked safely away in a heavily medicated psychiatric ward, was currently standing proudly in the middle of a high society gala. Mr. Sterling, the ruthless billionaire chief executive officer of Vanguard Developments, frowned deeply. He looked back and forth between my commanding presence in the center aisle and the sudden chaotic panic visibly radiating clearly from Clara. "And Marcus, who is this woman?" Mr. Sterling demanded, his booming voice echoing through his lapel microphone. "What is the meaning of this blatant interruption?" I did not answer him immediately. Instead, I took another deliberate, measured step forward, closing the distance between myself and the massive, elevated stage. I wanted every single person in that lavish ballroom to clearly see my face. I wanted them to see my immaculate vintage designer suit, my perfectly styled hair, and the fierce, unwavering clarity in my dark eyes. I did not look like a frail, confused, elderly woman suffering deeply from severe late-stage dementia. I looked exactly like the formidable pioneer of commercial real estate who had successfully fought off predatory corporate developers for 4 incredible decades. Before Clara could attempt to flee the stage or shout another command, the bright overhead house lights suddenly violently cut out. The massive grand ballroom was instantly plunged into total, absolute darkness. A collective shocked gasp echoed aggressively through the crowded room as hundreds of wealthy guests suddenly found themselves standing in pitch-black shadow. The live string quartet players, who had been nervously lingering near the exit doors, let out startled shouts. Then the 2 gigantic digital presentation screens flanking the main stage violently flickered back to life. They were originally programmed to display the sleek, modern architectural mock-ups of the $50 million tech campus Vanguard Developments thought they were buying. Instead, the massive glowing monitors flooded the dark ballroom with a harsh, glaring blue light. Jamal had initiated the final devastating phase of our digital counterstrike. The left screen instantly filled with heavily encrypted banking spreadsheets that Jamal had masterfully extracted from Clara's hidden personal computer. The numbers were massive and entirely undeniable. Every single illicit transfer, every single stolen corporate dollar, and every single desperate payment to the violent offshore syndicate was projected 30 feet high for the entire city elite to clearly read. The top of the digital document bore the undeniable official logo of Marcus and his tech company, proving exactly where the stolen funds had originated. The right screen flashed immediately, revealing the terrifying, deeply hidden cartel ledger. It displayed the monumental $30 million principal debt Clara owed to the ruthless private equity group. The bright red numbers glowed like fresh blood against the stark white background of the massive presentation monitor. There was absolutely no way she could possibly deny or explain away the catastrophic financial ruin she had actively brought upon her own family. "Look at the screen!" a prominent city politician shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the glaring digital display. She has been actively laundering millions of dollars for the past 12 months. The wealthy crowd erupted into a fresh new wave of chaotic, panicked whispering. Corporate executives rapidly pulled out their own mobile devices, frantically taking clear photographs of the massive screens to protect their own financial interests. Clara physically recoiled from the glaring blue light as if it were burning her bare skin. She covered her face with her trembling, manicured hands, but there was absolutely nowhere she could hide from the monumental digital execution happening right now. But Jamal was not even close to being finished with her. The screens suddenly violently flickered again. The offshore banking ledgers vanished entirely, replaced by high-resolution scans of medical documents. It was the heavily forged psychiatric evaluation Clara had maliciously purchased from a corrupt physician just 2 days ago. The document prominently featured my full legal name, Josephine Caldwell, alongside a completely fabricated diagnosis of severe late-stage dementia and violent paranoid schizophrenia. Right next to the fraudulent medical evaluation, the right screen displayed a series of crystal-clear email intercepts. These were the private, highly confidential messages Clara had confidently sent to the expensive psychiatric facility. The text was enlarged, so every single person in the back of the massive ballroom could easily read her vicious, cruel words. "I need her securely locked in the maximum security ward," Clara had written in the displayed email. "Do not let her have any access to a telephone or any outside visitors. She will aggressively claim she owns the commercial properties, but you must heavily sedate her immediately. I will pay double your standard rate for absolute permanent discretion." Marcus let out a loud, agonizing sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a physical dry heave. He stepped closer to the massive glowing screen, his wide, terrified eyes scanning the cruel, vicious words his own wife had typed. He read the undeniable proof that Clara had actively, ruthlessly planned to lock his perfectly sane, loving mother in a padded clinical cage for the rest of her natural life. He realized she had entirely planned to medically torture me just to securely steal my real estate legacy and hide her massive criminal debt. "How could you?" Marcus choked out, his voice completely breaking as he slowly turned to look at the weeping, terrified woman crouching on the stage floor. "You told me you loved her. You held my hand and cried real tears while you told me her brain was actively dying. You are a completely soulless, absolute monster." Clara could not even form a coherent response. She just continued to sob hysterically, curled into a tight, pathetic ball on the expensive stage carpet. She knew her high society life was entirely, permanently over. Suddenly, a loud, sharp feedback whine screeched through the massive ballroom audio-visual system, causing several guests to physically cover their ears. The noise abruptly cut off, replaced by the calm, steady, undeniably powerful voice of my 21-year-old grandson. Jamal had completely hijacked the primary public address system from his secure location in the hotel parking lot. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Jamal announced, his deep voice echoing perfectly clearly through the expensive surround sound speakers. "My name is Jamal Caldwell. I am the very proud grandson of Josephine Caldwell, the true, legitimate owner of the Bronzeville Heritage Block." Clara flinched violently at the sound of his clear, confident voice. She had spent the last 5 years treating Jamal like absolute garbage, constantly telling Marcus his son was a worthless disappointment who would never achieve anything significant. Now that exact same young man held her entire miserable life firmly in his capable hands. "The highly sensitive documents you are currently viewing on these presentation screens are not fabricated," Jamal continued, his voice ringing out with pure righteous authority. "They are the exact, unedited digital records of a massive, coordinated corporate fraud orchestrated entirely by Clara Caldwell. She maliciously attempted to steal $50 million of protected federal land to rapidly pay off a $30 million debt to a violent offshore criminal syndicate." The entire ballroom fell completely dead silent. The wealthy elite investors were completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic crimes being laid out before them. They were actively witnessing the absolute total destruction of a prominent socialite in real time. "I want to clearly assure everyone in this room that you do not need to worry about contacting the local authorities tonight," Jamal stated confidently. "Exactly 1 hour ago, I securely transmitted this entire unredacted data packet directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Illinois State Medical Board." Clara let out a long, horrifying wail of pure, absolute devastation. The federal authorities already had absolutely everything. They had the wire fraud evidence, the medical forgery, the offshore syndicate's routing numbers, and the fake property transfer deeds. She could not possibly run. She could not possibly hide. She was completely trapped in a massive, airtight federal cage. The glaring blue light from the massive screens bathed the ballroom in a harsh glow. The digital evidence of corporate fraud remained projected 30 feet high. The absolute silence was violently shattered by a sound coming from the busy downtown streets outside. It started as a faint wail echoing off the Chicago skyscrapers, but it rapidly grew into a deafening roar. Multiple heavy police sirens were actively converging on the Drake Hotel. The federal authorities had officially arrived to collect their prize tonight. Clara whipped her head toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, her eyes wide with sheer terror. The flashing red and blue emergency lights violently pierced through the sheer silk curtains, painting her terrified face in alternating colors of doom. She realized in that exact second that Jamal had not been bluffing. He had successfully transmitted every single encrypted file to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Her brilliant web of lies was not just unraveling, it was actively detonating right in front of her. She frantically looked out at the massive crowd of elite billionaires, desperately searching for a single sympathetic face, but she found absolutely nothing except pure cold corporate disgust. Mr. Sterling stepped away from her as if she were carrying a deadly plague. He aggressively motioned for his private security detail to form a protective physical barrier, completely isolating himself from the cornered criminal standing on his stage. The massive mahogany doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom suddenly burst open. A highly coordinated team of federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets aggressively swarmed into the lavish space. They moved with terrifying professional efficiency, their heavy black boots thudding loudly against the polished marble floor. They completely ignored the hundreds of wealthy, screaming guests and marched directly down the wide center aisle toward the brightly lit, elevated stage. The lead federal agent raised his hand and loudly commanded everyone in the room to remain perfectly, completely still. Clara let out a horrifying, guttural shriek of pure animal panic. The deeply ingrained survival instinct of a cornered predator forcefully kicked in, completely overriding any remaining shred of her high society dignity. She hoisted the heavy, glittering skirt of her incredibly expensive designer gown and frantically bolted toward the narrow, velvet-draped service exit at the far back corner of the grand stage. She completely forgot she was still wearing towering, expensive designer heels. As she sprinted across the rough carpeted stage floor, her sharp stiletto heel violently caught the thick edge of an electrical cable housing. She fell incredibly hard. Her fragile, elegant facade was instantly destroyed as she crashed face first onto the unforgiving stage floor, right at the polished leather shoes of the furious Vanguard chief executive officer. Before she could even attempt to push her bruised, trembling body back up from the carpet, two massive federal agents aggressively bounded up the stage steps. They forcefully descended upon her, pinning her violently against the floorboards. They swiftly grabbed her manicured hands and aggressively wrenched them behind her back. The loud, sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly into place echoed clearly through the massive ballroom microphone system. "Marcus, please help me," Clara screamed hysterically, wildly, thrashing her constrained body against the firm, unyielding grip of the federal agents. "You have to call our defense lawyers right now, Marcus. You forcefully promised to always fiercely protect me. Tell these federal agents they are making a massive, catastrophic mistake tonight. Tell them I was profoundly confused and terrified for our family." Marcus stood perfectly rigid near the edge of the glass podium, staring down at his weeping, desperate wife. The profound, heavy shock that had completely paralyzed his entire body finally dissolved into a state of pure, absolute, horrified clarity. He actively looked at the vicious, greedy woman who had maliciously attempted to permanently lock his own sane mother inside a terrifying clinical psychiatric cage. He looked at the cruel, remorseless criminal who had aggressively embezzled millions of dollars from his own private software company to eagerly pay off a violent, ruthless offshore syndicate. "I am absolutely never calling a single lawyer for you," Clara Marcus stated, his voice dropping to a cold, dead, hollow pitch that effectively silenced her frantic, desperate screaming. "You ruthlessly, maliciously tried to permanently destroy my own mother today, just to temporarily save your own pathetic, greedy life. You manipulated my lingering trauma over losing my father, and you forcefully used my love to completely blind me. You are a terrifying monster, Clara. I genuinely, deeply hope you spend the rest of your natural life rotting in a cold, dark federal prison cell." The lead federal agent firmly grabbed Clara by her trembling shoulders and hauled her up to her shaking feet. "Clara Caldwell, you are officially under arrest for massive federal wire fraud. aggressive identity theft, and criminal conspiracy to commit severe elder abuse. He announced, his booming voice radiating pure, undeniable legal authority. He aggressively recited her Miranda rights as she continued to openly, violently sob, her heavy, dark makeup aggressively streaming down her pale, ruined face. The federal agents physically dragged her away from the bright stage, forcefully marching her down the main center aisle and out of the grand ballroom forever. The chaotic noise of the panicked, wealthy crowd swelled aggressively around us, but my attention was completely locked onto my deeply broken son. Marcus slowly turned his devastated, tear-filled eyes away from the grand ballroom doors and looked directly down at me, standing proudly behind the sleek glass podium. The massive protective blindfold he had willingly, comfortably worn for so many long years was permanently, aggressively removed. He finally clearly saw the profound, terrible truth of his own catastrophic failures. I took one slow, trembling step toward me, and then his entire physical body completely, aggressively collapsed. My brilliant, highly successful millionaire son fell forcefully onto his knees on the rough stage carpet, right in front of the entire. 6 months have passed since that unforgettable night at the Drake Hotel. The federal justice system moves slowly, but it moves with absolute, terrifying certainty when you hand them a perfectly packaged digital bow of undeniable evidence. Clara was officially sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for massive wire fraud, aggressive identity theft, and criminal conspiracy to commit severe elder abuse. She lost her expensive designer gowns and her powerful high society status entirely. Now she wears a standard-issue canvas uniform and will spend the next decade and a half securely locked inside a cold concrete cell. The corrupt elite physician, who willingly signed my fraudulent dementia diagnosis, lost his prestigious medical license permanently and is currently nervously awaiting his own criminal trial. A's for my millionaire son. Marcus, the intense public fallout from the massive corporate scandal completely devastated his pristine professional reputation. His thriving technology company took a catastrophic financial hit, losing several key wealthy investors overnight. He was forced to aggressively downsize his entire life, moving out of his lavish, sprawling mansion and into a modest, plain downtown condominium. I was finally violently forced to strip away the toxic, arrogant layers of his sheltered life and deeply reflect on his profound, devastating failures as a man, a father, and a completely blind son. He calls my personal cell phone every single Sunday morning without fail. I calmly listen to his desperate, apologizing voicemails. Sometimes when I truly feel he has genuinely earned a brief moment of my valuable time, I actually answer the call. Healing from that level of profound family betrayal is a very long, difficult road, and he has to bravely walk it entirely on his own now. Today I am standing proudly inside my beautifully newly renovated executive office, right in the historic heart of the Bronzeville Heritage Block. The vibrant, busy streets directly below my large glass window are bustling warmly with thriving, independent, Black-owned community businesses. We did not just successfully protect our precious historic neighborhood from greedy corporate destruction. We absolutely fiercely fortified it for the next upcoming generation. I slowly turn around and warmly smile at my brilliant, fiercely loyal grandson, Jamal. I officially, legally transferred the primary executive management of the irrevocable Federal Historic Landmark Trust directly into his highly capable young hands. He is currently aggressively modernizing our entire vast commercial portfolio, utilizing his advanced genius cybersecurity skills, while successfully proudly finishing his senior college year at Morehouse. He has fully, undeniably earned his rightful permanent place at the head of the powerful Caldwell family empire. I walk gracefully over to my large, polished mahogany desk and gently touch the framed silver photograph of my late husband, Calvin. We bravely built a formidable, lasting legacy that absolutely nobody could ever easily steal. Clara foolishly looked at my silver-gray hair and my vintage clothing and arrogantly assumed I was just a fragile, confused old woman, helplessly waiting to be easily discarded. She completely foolishly forgot that you absolutely do not build a massive commercial real estate empire by being quiet and weak. I was the master architect of this entire historic city block, and I possessed the exact perfect blueprint to aggressively, ruthlessly tear her vicious, greedy lies straight to the ground. So that is my personal story. I would absolutely love to hear what you think about my actions today. Could you have proudly walked away and let the federal agents aggressively arrest your own family members, or would you have foolishly tried to handle the devastating betrayal privately? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments section below, and be sure to highly subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories.